back after summer recess. Just to remind you that this meeting is being broadcast online and throughout Parliament buildings. So members of the public and those watching online, you're also welcome. Members, if you can ensure your phones are muted, and to remind you that there's no recording or photography of the meeting allowed. So if you're content, we will proceed with the agenda. Members, there are no apologies to date. I am aware that Claire Sugden is just finishing off a meeting of the Women's Caucus, and hopefully she'll be joining us very shortly. Do we have any declarations of interest to declare? No? Okay, thank you. Okay, members, item 3 there, Chairperson's business. So we've got a committee motion. I'm going to refer you to pages 6 to 7 of your meeting pack. And just to remind, at our meeting on the 2nd of July this year, the committee agreed to extend the committee stage of the inquiry and redress scheme bill until Friday the 30th of January 2026. Just to advise that the committee needs to agree the motion to extend the bill, and I'm going to ask the clerk to read the draft motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. This is page 7 of your committee pack. So as the Chair said, this is just really the belt and braces to make sure that we do extend the committee stage of the bill through to January next year. So just to read into the record, it's a committee motion and it states that in accordance with Standing Order 33.4, the period referred to in Standing Order 33.2 be extended to the 26th of January 2026 in relation to the committee stage of the inquiry, Mother and Baby Institutions, Magdalene Laundries and Workhouses and Redress Scheme Bill, NIA Bill 1522-27.
Okay, thank you. Clarke, any comments or people content? Go ahead, please.
Sorry. Content with the proposal. Just to ask, we had thought, whilst we're giving ourselves that time for all the consultation and responses, it might be possible to pull it forward if we find things progress. Is that still, if we can, just given the urgency of the matter, and the length of time people have been waiting? Yeah.
Well, we've been saying that at the familiarisation events as well. Yeah. So it's not a target.
Yeah.
It's just gives us it's a limit. It's a limit.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So I think everybody's content. Thank you, Clarke.
Thank you.
Okay. 3.2 Rosetta Trust. So just refer you to page 8 of the meeting. Just to advise, a member of the Rosetta Trust wrote to me as chair, outlining his concerns around the proposed memorial plaque transcript for victims and survivors of the historical institutional abuse. Just wondering if people have any comments to make. I suppose there is a potential action of the BAFA, and that be to write to the department to ask what consideration has been given by the Executive Office to the proposed transcript to take account of any concerns raised by victims and survivors regarding the wording, and also I think the state apology is still another issue they're still concerned about.
So
Please.
I would be in favour of sending that letter in.
Okay.
I think that's fair enough.
I think it's fair comment.
Okay, thank you.
Well, and just to comment, the letter is addressed to the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, so, and I think maybe you were copied in.
Yeah,
but
sorry. Okay, yes.
So I presume it has been sent to them, but certainly we can forward it on,
We'll check that.
Yeah, I think that possibly it would be useful for us to send our own letter as opposed to chase up on in terms of the Rosetta Trust letter, but yeah, it's just keeping us updated on that.
Oh, but I think we should send it on and say that the Jerry has written to you asking for a response. So rather than just being a post box for TEO. Is that fair enough?
You've received it and discussed it. And
Yeah.
want to see action.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, 3.3 familiarisation session. So we had our first session here in the Assembly at the start of July. Thank you to those who attended. I think it was really, really useful event. And then we had a second one yesterday in the new offices, Waves new trauma centre in Belfast. We had a really, I think it was probably about 18 or maybe. It was a really good turnout. Wee bit smaller venue, obviously, a wee bit more intimate, but it was really useful. And I think there's some people who'd come forward over the summer that maybe hadn't been engaged or aware before, so I think it was useful. We have a second one online tomorrow, and I think the link has already been distributed to members. So if you can even join for part of that, I think it's really encouraging for those people who have a stake in this process to know that the MLAs are approachable and engaged. Okay, members' draft minutes. So just to advise that these are found on pages 9 to 21 of your pack. And if you're content, that these are a reflection of the proceedings. I will go ahead and sign them. Content?
Great.
Okay, so in terms of matters arising, there are a number that I am proposing, given the importance of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, that we pick some of those up under any other business. Is that
Fair enough.
okay? Okay, so I think we're ready, members, to proceed then with our first oral briefing, and that's to ask the Clarke team here to invite our ministers in. You just take your ease for a minute while they join the meeting. And just while they join the meeting, just to seek your agreement for Hansard to record this session. That's okay, thank you. So members, I'm going to refer you to pages 29 to 30 of your pack for the Clarke's brief, pages 31 to 128 of the pack for the copy of the Programme for Government, pages 129 to 147 of the pack for a copy of the Executive Office's Business Plan 2025-26. And sorry, could you update? Are they not here yet?
Yeah.
We're maybe just too officious in our business. So I wonder, members, then will we go back to the matters arising out of the last minutes? And I think there's a particular issue there in terms of the correspondence we've received from the Quality Commissioner outlining the approach and agreeing to come back in, I think, later on, I think.
Page 23.
Page 23,
of the
okay.
pack, yes.
Okay, members, if you just refer to page 23 of your pack then. And I just wonder, does anybody have any comments, or are people content to hold those until we have our session, oral evidence session with the Equality Commissioner?
Okay.
Yeah.
Chair, just to say, we've penciled that in. We'll obviously try and get the Commissioner up as soon as possible, because this is I know, a very pressing issue for committee. I think we've penciled them in for the end of October. We're very busy over the next 2 or 3 weeks with evidence sessions for the bill, but we'll endeavour to get it done before Halloween recess. They have also included within the submission just an update to the roadmap that they have said that they're going to talk to us about. So that is there, but we'll endeavour to get them in for the next number of weeks.
Okay, thank you, Clarke. Okay, members, I'm going to jump right down the agenda then to correspondence. We'll get some of that cleared up. So I'm going to refer you to pages 430 to 451 of the pack for a summary of the committee correspondence, and I'm just going to draw your attention to a number of items. 9.7, there's individual correspondence around the urgent need for a national trauma plan for Northern Ireland. You'll find information about this in pages 490 to 504 of your pack. Just to advise that the committee has received this correspondence from an individual regarding the urgent need for a national trauma plan for Northern Ireland. I'm asking you to note this correspondence and to ask your agreement to seek permission to forward the individual's correspondence to the mental health champion and ask her what work has been progressed in this area, and if there's anything that we can do as a committee. People content? Okay. 9.10, statutory committee responses in terms of views on the inquiry, mother and baby institutions, Magdalene, Laundries and Workhouses, and Redress scheme bill. So I would refer you to pages 540 to 545 of your meeting pack. And just to advise that the committee has received responses from the following committees: Infrastructure, Finance, ERA and Justice in relation to their views on the Inquiry and Redress scheme bill. The Committee for Finance suggests that the committee may want to consider those who may wish to give evidence but have left Northern Ireland and live elsewhere in the world, such as the US, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. And just to advise, press releases have appeared in these countries, and embassies in these areas have been targeted. The ERA, Infrastructure and Justice Committees have indicated a nil response. However, the Justice Committee has requested clarification on whether clerical abuse is covered by the provisions of the bill, or if it will form a strand of the inquiry, particularly given the clerical aspect of many of the institutions within its scope. So just to advise that responses from other committees will be added to the committee's final report. And I'm asking you to note this item of correspondence and seek your agreement to forward the Justice Committee's correspondence to the Executive Office in relation to the query regarding clerical abuse. Go ahead please, Timothy.
Yes, Chair, regarding the publication, the promotion around it, I had a meeting this morning and the topic come up of how we can better reach people, and what they have done is actually contacting organisations as well that would have access to people, and that might be something that we need to identify in a number of countries, especially in mainland UK, where instead of putting adverts and built up places, which is good and I fully support, but targeting certain organisations that may well have links and affiliations with people that have moved from Northern Ireland over the years. So that's just something that's been a best practice. It's something that has worked for others, and it might be something that we need to consider going forward. Is that a better use of some of our resources?
I'm wondering, the Deputy Chair and I met with the Commissioner for Survivors of Institutional Child Abuse just last week, and I think that Fiona Ryan and her staff might be well placed to advise on that, because obviously they've been through this process a few years before us in terms of that diaspora getting out. And just wonder, can we maybe, if you haven't already, engage with the Commissioner's office around some suggestions for that?
That's where that came from, that suggestion I made.
Oh, right. Well, we'll do it formally then.
Yeah.
We'll do it formally.
Chair, just sorry.
I'll bring you in after.
Right.
Sorry, I was just going to say, members may have seen the ITV documentary last month, two-part documentary on institutional child abuse, or mother and baby homes, sorry, in England. A substantial amount of academic work done in the background of that, and I think it might be useful for us to liaise with the academic so we can understand better how they have done that communication, because one of the pieces that they showed in the documentary was correspondence between some homes in England and various church and other home institutions, both north and south. So there was a lot of correspondence, went backwards and forwards, refusing to take children because of their colour. But setting that aspect of the horrors of it to one side, I think if we made contact with the academics, it might also be worthwhile making contact with the documentary makers as well, because they gave some misinformation about Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland wasn't really well covered. They covered Scotland and they said how far the Scottish situation had moved, but there was very little reference to us, and it might be useful to go back on that.
Go ahead, please.
No, it's just to ask, do we have a panel with Corsica, with the Commissioner coming up?
She's coming soon, yes. Thank you.
There's November.
Carol, did you want to?
Yeah, Chair, did we, some time ago, not so long ago, that TO funded, they gave some money for contact, was it with the independent?
It's Recovery Independent Panel, yes.
Aye, it was quite substantial money. Was it 80 grand or something like that?
Yeah, 90 or something, yeah.
Right,
It's
okay.
way up there, yeah.
It would be good just to find out what's happening there, because I know it's not just for external communications, there's some internal work to be done. It would be good, and maybe that's what the Commissioner was talking about.
Well, following on from what the Commissioner shared with me this morning was that internally, part of her budget, they produced, was it 700 and something packs, and shared them. So surely the resources we would have and the resources within the department, that's at the very least something we would do. It just shows you the determination that a Commissioner has if they want to be proactive, what they can achieve, and it's paid dividends in return.
Okay, thank you. Did I hear voices outside? Do we think that possibly the ministers have arrived?
Entourage. You behave yourself now, Harry. You're jumping in a bit, yeah.
Good afternoon.
I know.
Change of surroundings, Chair.
Yes. Okay. Okay, good afternoon, ladies. Thank you for joining us today. So we have the First Minister, Michelle O'Neill, with Emma Little-Pengelly, the Deputy First Minister, with Pam Cameron, Junior Minister, and Aisling Reilly, also Junior Minister. I believe we've just got over an hour. You've opening remarks, and we're going to sort of divide our time up between us, and I've asked the members to be succinct and to the point, so that's what we stick to that. Have you opening remarks you'd like to make yourselves?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair and members. Great to be back in front of you, and thanks for rearranging, because I was sick before summer whenever we tried to come previously, so appreciate that. So obviously it's been a busy summer for everybody, and we're all glad to be back at it, hopefully had a bit of a rest as well. I suppose on a good point, on a highlight of the summer was obviously the success of the Open, and the fact that we had so many people that visited our shores, and it was a huge success for the 153rd Open. I think we attracted something like 300,000 golfers, so that in itself just brings great advantages to the Northwest, but even wider than that. Just to say then, we also, over the summer, we appointed a number of commissioners. So Joe McVeigh as the new Commissioner for Victims and Survivors. We also appointed Clarke as the new Commissioner for Public Appointments also. And we very much look forward to supporting them in their work, and also, obviously you as a committee will also want to do likewise and work with them. Back in June we introduced legislation to establish an inquiry into the mother and baby institutions, the Magdalene Laundries and the Workhouses, an associated redress scheme. A vital piece of work, and I want to thank the two junior ministers who are taking the lead in terms of this important piece of legislation. You as a committee and we also have heard many stories, all of which are very harrowing in terms of the experiences of women and children, so it's important that obviously that we get this right, and we really appreciate the work that the committee is doing in that regard, because the experiences of far too many are very much rooted in the systemic misogyny that and treatment that they endured at incredibly vulnerable times of their own lives, many while pregnant. All of that was just completely inhumane and nothing short of cruel. Their children, who are now adults, have been let down in every other possible way over the decades also. So I really hope that we can get legislation that is really fit for purpose and really meets the needs of all of those who've suffered and those who want to have access to truth and justice. So just to commend the committee for that work, and we will continue to work with you. We have the programme for government, our shared plan, our executive priorities to deliver what matters most to people. And one of those most urgent issues is the issue of ending violence against women and girls. As you all know, sadly, we all know too many families that have been left devastated as a direct result of this senseless violence. And unfortunately, and so sadly, again over the summer, we've seen the devastating situation in Fermanagh with Vanessa White and her children Sarah and James, whose lives were brutally cut short in Maguire's Bridge. 3 lives taken in just the most harrowing, barbaric way, leaving behind a whole trail of complete devastation for their families, but also for the local community. And some members will know that even more, being very closely bedded in those communities. But this is a scourge, this is a priority for myself and for the DFM in terms of our own, and the junior ministers in terms of our own office. And our desire is to ensure that we get to a point where we have a society that women and girls feel safe and are safe in their home, in the workplace, in the streets, or anywhere they must go. So in that regard, in terms of our own strategy, we've launched our Change Fund, and I have to say that we're getting really, really good feedback. Hopefully you are too, in terms of the funding that's actually reaching right into grassroots communities and making a real difference at that local change fund level. It's investing across a whole raft of grassroots initiatives that are empowering youth groups, our councils, our sporting organisations, businesses and schools, all to tackle head on violence against women and girls. And just in that regard, both myself and the DFM were in Craigavon last week, Craigavon Integrated College, which was the college of Natalie McNally, who was tragically also killed, and we were able to go there and speak to the pupils, and actually it was so heartening to see that this was day 1 of year 5. That's old, 5th year, my terms, year 12, children coming back in, and this was the priority area which they had chosen, which we were quite enthused and thought that was a great example of how the whole of society is listening to us all playing our part in this area. So as you all know, change happens by local communities and our next generation knocking their heads together. So we were very pleased to see that happening, but clearly we have an awful lot more to do to deliver across all the priority areas that we've identified. And one of the things that we've done is to identify a new delivery unit, which is going to be laser focused in terms of the executive priorities to drive reform right across public services and making sure that the priorities that we have identified get top priority and they get the attention and the support that they need to make a real impact. And the focus that the executive agreed for the first topic for the delivery unit is the issue of waiting lists, and I'm glad that we've seen some progress being made in that endeavour already, but this is the focus of the delivery unit. So just to say that's the starting point, and as executive we discussed other areas where we may then move the delivery unit into in terms of other areas that we want to try to drive on. I suppose the other thing for me to say is last week we had our executive meeting and there was unequivocal support for what we saw over the summer in terms of the race incidents, sectarian incidents, and there was unequivocal condemnation from our executive in terms of those attacks that we've seen in recent months, going as far back as May. But I suppose for us, it's to be very clear, no one should ever feel intimidated and terrified in their home, in their society, in their community, and everybody has the right to be safe and to feel safe. And I think collectively we all say no to racism and we all say no to this in our society, and even events of recent days should give us all cause for concern about what's happening out there in society, and particularly those people that are involved in this behaviour. Then I suppose just to say the delivery of the refugee integration strategy as well then has been taken forward, and were key building blocks, I think, to make progress across this important area. Helen McCarthy, which I'm not sure has been before the committee yet or not, the new Chief Scientific and Technology Advisor. You'll get a chance to meet with Helen, who is a breath of fresh air about how we need to modernise and change how we transform, or how we deliver public services, but how we transform public services. And I think her determination is to bring people in from our universities and others with expertise to help us actually to do things differently. So I think that her knowledge and expertise is going to be really significant in terms of us really driving forward that transformation. So that's why we launched our AI and digital unit again over the summer, as we embrace, I suppose, the new world that we all live in, where technology has a huge responsibility in terms of some of the things that we want to try achieve. So finally for me then, before I hand over to DFM, is we hope to be able to announce very successful the candidates for the Language Commissioner roles. Again, that was a lot of work which we engaged in over the summer on the Irish Language Commissioner, the Ulster Scotch and Ulster British tradition, and the Director for Office of Identity and Cultural Expression. So we carried out quite a considerable number of interviews, and we're very close to being able to finalise on all of that. So that's it by way of opener for me, Chair.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Firstly, can I say thank you for the opportunity to come and speak with you today. I think it's worked out quite timely in terms of it being the first week of the new term, not only just to reflect on what we've been doing within the department, what we've achieved within the department so far, but also in our shared role as leading the executive, and with particular focus on the programme for government and the programme for government priorities. There has been a significant amount of work carried out, not just through the team in the executive office, but of course across the executive and executive departments. We have made a strong start in relation to all of those priorities, and I wanted to touch just very briefly on some of those in the opening remarks today. We have invested millions in childcare and early years to support families. The childcare subsidy scheme has already saved eligible working parents around £8 million since it was launched in September of 2024. The committee will be aware that the executive has committed to investing £55 million this year across a range of childcare actions. We have also been able to achieve getting £27.5 million for an SEN transformation project. And we hope that this will be truly transformed. We all know the challenges faced by those parents trying to get the appropriate place for their child and the appropriate care for that child and education for that child. There's also been the creation of those 3,000 additional SEN places, but we know looking forward to future years that this is a demand that is continuing to grow, and this is an executive that must rise to meet that demand. And indeed, I think the important thing is not just those places, and I welcome the fact that no child with SEN is without a place at this stage, finally. Of course, we want that to be dealt with at an earlier stage. We are working towards that, an earlier stage of the year, to give that certainty to parents and to remove that anxiety. But I think in particular it's really important that it's the right place for the child as well, and we will all know constituents who have concerns about that. We've also allocated millions to deal with waiting list. Almost 59,000 additional outpatient, diagnostic and inpatient procedures have been delivered. That was announced as an update just by the Health Minister last week. That's well on track of meeting the programme for government target of 70,000. But again, we're acutely aware people do not see the waiting list that they're not on. They see the difficulties that they have in terms of accessing GP and in terms of waiting for far, far too long to get the treatment that they need. So that is a significant piece of work. But I welcome the fact that that's 50,000 additional appointments, diagnostic and inpatient procedures. I also welcome that the Transformation Fund has invested £61 million in the multidisciplinary team transformation project, and we'll be able to see that rolling out over the course of the next number of years as well. As the First Minister has touched on, we have created the delivery unit, but also the Office of AI and Digital, and that is working under the CSTA, our new post, which is to drive that digital and AI transformation across the civil service. We often talk about the frustrations of the way things are done, and we're very conscious of that. If we continue to do things in the same way, we are likely only to get the same results. So this is very much these are very much initiatives driven by the centre, driven through our leadership to try to ensure that we're seeing the genuine transforming of the way we do business, but that very closely tied, of course, to the improvement of outcomes and efficiencies, because that is key. It can't just be another layering on in terms of the activities that happen within departments. That's just a small flavour of some of the things that we've been doing. We will be coming out with updated reports in terms of progress against all 9 priorities, but I'm sure you didn't want me to go into all of the detail of that here this morning. But I did want to give you a flavour of some of the real tangible progress that has been made, the real and tangible delivery that has taken place. And while some people do not see that, if they're not impacted by it, right now in Northern Ireland there are many thousands of people who have seen the benefit of those initiatives and that drive by the executive in terms of delivery. In terms of the department and the executive office, of course, we have a number of policy areas that we are pushing forward with as well. Michelle has mentioned the event at Craigavon Integrated College, and again I think it was very timely that we were able to go to that just at the beginning of this term, particularly in light of the tragic events in the summer. But you know, that was a challenging event, but it was very worthwhile. It was good to see so many young people there to hear about the challenges being faced. The McNally family, and I've said this many times before, but I'm always in awe at their bravery, that their courage to continuously step forward in very difficult circumstances to tell their story, to tell people a little bit about who Natalie was as a person, and to, you know, and that's all being done by them because they do not want to see another young woman, or girl lose their lives. They don't want any other family to have to suffer what they are suffering and what they have gone through. And that was a challenging event, but as we said, like, success in terms of our ending violence against women and girls strategy will be that we don't have those conferences talking about that type of violence, but we know that there needs to be that vigilance, and it is a multi-generational thing, and engaging with young people is so important, particularly around calling out those misogynistic attitudes that, as we know, sadly can give rise in a small minority to much more terrible and tragic outcomes. We don't want any other family to go through that, and as you know, we published our Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, but not only that, the delivery plan, and I'm really pleased that not just did we get the £3.2 million out the door, but we were able to secure an additional 2.2 million to add to that. I know that the last time we were at the committee, this was an issue that was raised. Of course, 3.2 million or additional 2.2 million will never be enough to do what it is that we need to do, but we will continue to try to keep driving forward on this agenda. And as you know from the framework, that is across a number of different delivery partners. It's with really good organisations on the ground, and there is that fund that is putting funds directly to them, but it's also working with district councils, it's working with schools, it's working with youth groups. And you will be aware as well of the recent launch by the PSNI in conjunction under this, which is all about calling out those types of behaviours as well. The Historical Institutional Abuse Redress Scheme received 5,494 applications before it closed to applications in April. The majority of them have already been determined. There was, as anticipated, I know the committee discussed this, a surge of applications just in the weeks before the closure. That was anticipated. I think there was around 350 that came in at that time. So that has meant that the processing of those has taken a little bit longer, but I understand that there is anticipation that those will be finalised, and indeed the work will be completed by the end of November. It will depend just on the trickiness of some of those remaining cases, but that I think represents a significant amount of work and a lot of money that has gone out the door and into the hands of those that have suffered through that period, who fought hard for that justice and some recognition, and I think it is a small thing that we were able to do in terms of the scheme, but I know that has meant a huge amount to many, many people. It will mean that there's about £106 million that will have been given out over the course of that redress scheme, and as you know, we also have the support mechanisms in place for other help and support for victims. It's not just the money in terms of the redress payments. And lastly, I just wanted to turn to the disturbances on our streets periodically throughout the summer, and just over the last couple of days I think we've seen some really appalling scenes, absolutely appalling scenes. I think it's a good opportunity for us, all four of us sitting here today, to send our collective dismay at what has happened, and to reiterate our strong opposition to any threat, intimidation or violence, regardless of what that is fuelled by, but in this case we have seen that fuelled by racism. You will be aware that we had been engaging on this issue over the course of the summer. We were able to move fairly quickly to offer local councils additional funds to work with local communities on social cohesion issues. That was an urgent fund, but we recognise in order to tackle this requires not just money after the event or emergency funds. This has to be long-term interventions as well. This has to be about us tackling social cohesion. It has to be about us making sure that our schemes are actually delivering on outcomes when we look at listening to people, understanding the concerns of people, but also working on social cohesion as well. Throughout that period we were in regular contact with the PSNI, with local councils and with local representatives on the ground as well. There are a number of other areas, but I am very I know that you will not want me to continue to go through too much detail. I want to leave opportunity for questions, so I'll finish there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to both of you for coming along and your contributions there. So we're 20 months in, 20 months to go, so we haven't seen the updated good relations strategy from the review of TBUC. There isn't an operational plan against the delivery framework for the refugee integration strategy. There's no progress on any area of equality policy. There's no evidence that the Communities in Transition programme is going to be better focused at tackling the core issues. Meanwhile, what we are seeing is a lot of very unedifying bickering between the political representatives from both your parties. And I would put it to you that we are not seeing progress on these pieces of work, because I think it suits both your parties politically to keep this place divided and to keep people suspicious of each other. So if you can provide me with some tangible evidence to the contrary, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, well thanks, Chair. I mean, I don't agree with your assessment, of course, as you would have expected me to say. I believe that we're all tasked with trying to build a better society here, and I believe that's everybody's determination. I think on different issues at different times we might have different views on things, and that's okay. But I think the real work here is about being focused on building a good society, a fair society, an inclusive society, and that means building on good work that's been done up to this point. I share some frustration around some things not being able to be done as quick as I potentially would have liked them to be done, however, including the review of TBUC. But I can tell you that we're actively working our way through that right now, folding in the work that was done around FICT. I would much prefer that was dealt with long before now. However, this is the parameters in which we're working on. But both DFM and myself have actively been working through with officials the whole TBUC area of work, and we believe that there's really, really positive things that can be developed as part of the refreshed TBUC, not least that it will reflect where we are wider in society, the fact that we're a more diverse society, the fact that things have moved on so much from TBUC when it was designed 10 years ago. However, the principles are the same in terms of inclusivity and building better and prosperous societies, ensuring that everybody has a fair share. So I can tell you that we hope to be coming to talk to all executive parties around the TBUC strategy as well. In terms of equality legislation, I know the committee's work around equality gaps. I really want to see that piece of work, because I really believe in creating a society that is based on equality and fairness. So I hope that will help to inform how we might go forward. On the refugee integration strategy, we launched that back in May, and we're actively working with all the stakeholders and have had a number of workshops over the summer around the action plan and how we can advance that even further. On the race relations order, we actually had a meeting with our officials yesterday, and that work's coming here, Chair, because it's a big piece of legislation, even bigger than I envisaged from the outset. So that's a huge piece of work which we want to work with the committee on, but that's around updating what is outdated legislation around race relations. It's 1997, so it's very out of date. So we have a lot of work to do to update that, but we actively were working through that with officials yesterday to get that to the next stage. And you know that we've said that we'll bring that forward in this mandate, so that's still where our focus is. Then on CIT, which you know is work that we're working with across not just our own department but also with DOJ, and we've had some engagement with the Justice Minister as well in terms of how we might go forward. There's been an extension for the 2 years, but you're right, I mean, communities in transition, how long are we going to say that? We have to get to the point where we're just talking about how we're building communities up, and that's where I believe that all of our minds are focused, I think both DFM and myself in that regard. So there's a huge raft of work actually happening in this area. We ourselves, particularly over the incidents over the summer, hosted a number of meetings in terms of working with all stakeholders, because the issues that we see in our streets will not be tackled by one policy alone. They'll be tackled by all of society working together. And that at times in the summer has been a policing response, at times it's been a local council response, at times it's been within our own officials as well. So we're collectively and committed to working with stakeholders to improve the lives of everybody here, including some of those areas in which you've touched upon.
Like, absolutely, I completely disagree with your analysis of this. You know, the role that both the First Minister and myself have, there is the departmental role, it's also the strategic role. And in a shortened mandate, I think it's incredibly important that we do keep a very close watch on the strategic. We remain focused on the strategic, that we remain focused on trying to drive that delivery against the 9 key priorities. That is what we've been doing. Within the department, there is a significant amount of work that has taken place. Of course, the chairperson will be aware of the constrained budget environment. We were very pleased to have secured some additional funds, but those additional funds were very limited. Some additional funds in relation to violence against women and girls, and some additional funds to Together Building a United Community. That leaves very, very little room for layering on additional actions, but it does mean that we must look at what we're doing and if we can do those things better. And I would advise the chairperson, as I've no doubt she is fully aware, we do have a good relations strategy. Together Building a United Community is still in place, and we are operating that, and we are literally putting out many millions of pounds with incredibly positive evaluation and feedback in relation to those schemes. Everything from sports schemes to urban village projects, capital interventions, right through to working in the most difficult circumstances to try to bring about that social cohesion. We do still have that racial equality strategy. That is still in place. It goes to 2025, again, as you are aware. So the work that we are doing is very much in the timeline that we are moving forward. We have prioritised the key strategic issues that we need to drive forward, but we're continuing to ensure that everything is moving forward at pace. And I hope that throughout the course of this term you will be updated indeed on the progress across some of those areas that you have mentioned there. But just to touch on very quickly, when you look at even within the department, £104 million going out in terms of the severely injured victims pension, £106 million out in relation to the HIA payments. That's a significant amount of work happening within the department. When you look at the many schemes that we're rolling out under the ethnic minority scheme from TBUC right through. So there's a huge amount of work. But in terms of new achievements, certainly the ending violence against women and girls, very much a key priority for us when we came in. Really pleased that that is published, really pleased that it's not just a strategy, but it is a framework. And again, really pleased with the feedback on the ground, which has been hugely positive from women's groups, organisations and local councils as to the benefit of that work.
Thank you. Just conscious of time. So the First Minister there mentioned the tragic, very sad news over the summer and the last few months around the murder of women and their children in their homes and in our communities, and in the most part they were carried out by men. So in the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategic framework, in terms of the 2-year delivery plan, under the Working Better Together section, does state that there will be Northern Ireland specific reports commissioned to fill identified evidence gaps and inform future initiatives around attitudes of boys and men towards violence against women and girls. So we're now approaching the first year. Has this research been commissioned? How is it being focused? Because as I think it might have been yourself, Deputy First Minister, had said an additional 2.2 million. That's public money. So without the evidence and the research, how can we make sure that this is really tackling the core issues? So I'd like an update on that research, please.
Yeah, so that, as I understand, that research has already been commissioned, and we were waiting for that. But as you've said, we want to make sure that these schemes are doing what it is that we want to do, that it's really meeting the outcomes of the strategy. And that's why I think actually the approach of the entire team in terms of development of that strategy and the action plan has been a real exemplar, not just within our department but indeed across other departments, because it was a co-design process right from the outset.
Okay, but could you give us some specifics around the research? Who's been commissioned to do it? What's the time scale? It's really about that.
We can get that too. I don't have it in my notes, but one of the things I think that you're going to receive, if you haven't already, perhaps today, is around our first year sort of look back around what has been achieved. So we've reported that to the executive, because we said that we would keep doing that to the executive so that we can be held to account for progress that's been made. So we've done that at the last executive meeting. So if the committee hasn't received that yet, I know it's in train that you will receive that update. So that hopefully will even give a bit more information. But if the who and the time frame of that isn't in it, then we'll make sure you get that.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm conscious of time. I have two questions, but I'll only ask one of them. So Deputy First Minister, as you know, you and the First Minister were invited to attend at the end of June. First Minister was unwell, and then the committee team then made informal inquiries to see if you could come the first week in July, and we were advised, again informally, that you were in London. And I said to the team here, that's fair enough. And then it transpired you were in London at Wimbledon, right? So we weren't yet in recess. And I'm just wondering what judgment you exercise in terms of prioritising Wimbledon over coming here to hold yourself accountable to this committee. We had not had a briefing from you in terms of programme for government. We hadn't had you in front of us since last September, and I'm just wondering what judgment was exercised and how you feel that was a good use of public money to put your travel expenses on your trip to Wimbledon. I'm just giving you the opportunity to respond to that.
Look, as the chairperson is aware, I was fully ready to go on the scheduled appointment time to come before the committee, which was the week before. We were unable to do so because the First Minister was unwell. The chairperson will also know that I contacted you and I offered to come on my own rather than to disrupt the committee. I gave you that opportunity and you'd said that you were happy to reschedule because understandably you wanted both of us here. I was not scheduled the next week to be in front of this committee. And as I understand it, because I played no part in the communication between your committee and the department, that a simple query was asked, was there availability next week? And you were factually told that I was in London. That is a fact. Nobody misled anybody.
I didn't say it was misled. I'm asking you then. I'm asking
so apologies if you were misquoted.
No, I'm asking you on the basis
because
of that.
You were quoted.
Do you feel that under the circumstances, the fact you had not been here, held yourself accountable to this scrutiny committee, that was that the, should you not have maybe thought actually this is a leisure trip as opposed to, and I say whenever I first heard I thought, well, if that's business that's fine, but if it was just a leisure trip to London, should you not have made yourself available to this committee to come with the rest of your ministers to engage with these with our MLA?
I would, and again, if you were misquoted at the time, that's something that we can address after this committee, because I understood you said you felt that you'd been misled, which is a very serious allegation and one I take seriously. So if you didn't say that, I welcome your clarification that you didn't say that. As I said, look, I was invited.
Sorry, yeah.
I was invited.
Choice words were used that I felt that we had been misled. If we had been advised she's not available because she's in Wimbledon. But I think that choice words were used.
I would just simply reiterate, I was scheduled to appear in front of this committee. I was available to appear in front of this committee. And indeed, when we were not able to because of the ill health of the First Minister, I offered to come along. I was not scheduled to come to the committee the following week. I was otherwise occupied. I had been officially invited to attend that event as Deputy First Minister. I attended that event as Deputy First Minister, and as I understand it very clearly, it was communicated to you factually that I was in London, and no further questions were asked by you or your team. I was in London.
We
I was in
weren't yet
London.
summer
Sorry,
recess.
excuse me.
We
Sorry.
weren't yet in summer recess. I said that was on business.
I was in London. I was in London as Deputy First Minister. I was in London on the back of an official invitation. It was communicated factually and accurately to this committee, and I said I've made myself available to this committee as I will do. I was not scheduled to be in front of this committee that week. I made myself available when I was scheduled, and that was indicated to you that I was willing to come on ahead. So I've nothing further to add to that, Chairperson.
Thank you. Deputy Chair, go ahead.
Thank you to both of you for joining us today. I'll try and be as brief as I can. And a couple of areas I want to cover, one which the Chair has already dealt with, which is the area of the racial unrest that we have seen over the summer holidays and sadly in the last few days as well. And I appreciate that it is a massive task, and it's one which we don't have total control over in Northern Ireland. There are sadly very dangerous and dark forces right around the world, but specifically across the United Kingdom, that are agitating a lot of this that is going on in the background. But can you help us from a political perspective with your political parties and in the Assembly chamber to get out a very strong message? And the messages that you've given are welcome, but a very strong message that when politicians are using inflammatory language and words, that those have consequences. And that when people make remarks about those people who vulnerable adults, human beings who are in hotels, being told that they're given mobile phones and iPads and resources and money and benefits and access to health, none of which is true. Can you make very clearly, can you myth bust the misinformation that is given? I appreciate that all the programmes and all the money and all the resources that you put forward are very valuable and they have a long-term effect. But we have a problem. The problem is here. It's today. It was in a car park a few days ago. And if human beings are legally here in the United Kingdom, exercising their right to be here, then we must bust those myths. What will you do to attempt to bust those myths?
So I think our United Executive statement last week was a really strong starting point to do exactly what I know that you also want to achieve. I think we all want to achieve it, to be fair. I think that the myth busting is not just going to come down to, it does come down to us in the political sphere, but it's much wider than that. And this is actually a point that we actually put to the Chief Constable yesterday, because all agencies have a role to play here, because people take and absorb a lot of information from social media that is, completely incorrect, completely just made up nonsense, to be quite frank. And those of us, all of us that hold elected office, have a duty to call that out and try to correct it where best as we can. We too, at an executive office level, feel some frustration insofar as this is not a devolved, the area of immigration is not a devolved area, and therefore a lot of the information is held at a Home Office level and it's not even communicated here. That's not good enough. Because we have a lens to apply to our local community here in terms of how you can manage immigration, for example, as one area. So the myth busting, I think, and I think we need to all think about this, the myth busting needs to come from every quarter. So when people are saying a certain community is involved in criminality, the police need to say if that is correct or not. Provide that clarity. If people are saying it's because such and such a nationality has all the housing associations and executives need to come out and call that out for what it is and correct that information. So I suppose my determination would be that we work with all partners, because we'll only be successful in shaping this society if we work together in partnership. So I think all partners need to step up in terms of challenging that myth, because we don't have the problem in the same level as elsewhere because of just the sheer levels here and numbers. But you absolutely captured it. This is about people. This is about people who have come here. This is about communities that live here all their lives. This is about how do we have a cohesive society and how do we dispel some of the nonsense that leads to some of the antics that we see in the streets, some of the dangerous things that we see in the streets. And what we saw at, isn't it Conswater, the other day is something that makes me very alarmed about potentially where this all could go. So we all need to equally be alarmed. But I can tell you from our point as an executive office, we have challenged all the British Government ministers around this issue of the fact that this isn't evolved and therefore we don't have some of the information that actually could help to counter some of the things that you've actually identified.
I appreciate that a lot of this stuff has come from the top and does come from the top, but can you go back to your colleagues in the executive and say to them that where they have public-facing roles and where they have arm's length bodies underneath them, whether it's job markets, doctors, surgeries, whatever it happens to be, can we get a campaign out there and bust those myths in every single department, so when the public do come up against into the doctor's waiting room, when they're in the job market, when they're in all the public spaces, when they're in the local council leisure centre, can they see a poster saying the First and Deputy First Minister in Northern Ireland say it is not true, these are the lies and this is the truth? For goodness sake, do something like that. Be proactive and do something like that.
Even in advance of today, at our last executive meeting, this is one of the things that we discussed. For example, these are people who work in our health service. They keep our health service going. There are healthcare workers, there are nurses, there are doctors. They work across every aspect in our society. So the conversation that we did have already is around how do the health service and health trusts promote that message even more. So this is for all of us. I accept that, and I'm very happy to play a leadership role in trying to make sure that we all do more.
Yeah, look, from my perspective, and I've said it repeatedly, I think it's incredibly important that there is political leadership across all of the political parties, not just in the executive but in the assembly, where we are standing and speaking absolutely united in saying that all racism is wrong, and indeed that all threat, intimidation and violence is wrong. I think if we start from that position, which is a value-based approach, then it makes it very clear, no matter what incident, we are called on, and I made this reflection at the press conference last week. It's saddening how many times that we have to come out and condemn things because we don't want those things happening, and the fact it's on such a regular basis is dismaying, but not just dismaying. It is a call to action from our perspective to tackle this and to take it on. I would say from the outset though that there are two very distinct different issues. You're absolutely right. The issue of immigration is a very big one and a growing one right across, not just of course the UK. We've seen this in Ireland, we've seen this in mainland Europe, the US and beyond. We've seen protests on the streets in Australia and other places as well. It's a growing issue. There is a discussion to be had around immigration and migration. We will not always agree on those, we know that. I don't support uncontrolled migration. I think that this is a government that has lost control of migration. It's a government that needs to get a grip on migration. But we also need to be very clear. There is a space for discussion around those issues, and people can have that discussion. That is entirely separate from the line that is crossed, albeit by a minority. And again, I think it's to emphasise, and it's a message to send to those that are the victims of this. It is a minority of people who are engaging in crossing over that line into threat, intimidation and violence. It is appalling, it is wrong, it is unanimously and unreservedly condemned. And I think anybody who's seen those scenes just the last couple of days will share that horror as well. So look, I think it's leadership from political level, but it's action as well within departments, by the police, by our projects and schemes, doing everything that we can to try to tackle that, because they're wholly different issues. They get conflated at times, they ought not to be. We have to have the space for a discussion, but clear condemnation and a clear separation on the type of behaviour which is just completely unacceptable.
Just one more question then.
Very briefly, I just want to come on to the legislation with regards to mother and baby homes. There are a number of issues around that, and this committee will be working its way through that. But there are some key areas that have been flagged up to us already in terms of the legislation, or the proposed legislation that sits. One is around the very vexing question of the posthumous date, and I'm just looking specifically to see as a committee, that's an area we would be working on, but we would hope that we would be able to get some cooperation from TEO in respect of that, should we move some form of amendments in respect of it. The other area, just in relation to mother and baby homes, is the incredible work that has been done, not in respect of mother and baby homes, but by the Commissioner into Survivors of Child Abuse, Fiona Ryan. Her term of office is coming to an end. A lot of these issues are common issues. She's had raised with her concerns about mother and baby homes and things like that, but they don't fall within her remit. Is there a prospect of looking at that specific role, expanding that remit, and perhaps even expanding her current term of office? And then finally, just there's the whole area of how ultimately this will be paid for in terms of both the United Kingdom government's contribution to this, because if you look back to the documentary on ITV in the last couple of weeks, there's been quite a lot of commentary about the UK government simply not wanting to engage at all with regards to homes in England. And also the area, of, again in the legislation, about how we can achieve fair and genuine reparations from those institutions that caused the abuse in the first place.
Well, thanks for that. So we have very much a listening ear in terms of the committee's deliberations around the legislation and what potentially you may propose as amendments, and hopefully you'll feel that the whole way through. We want to really be engaged. We're very I suppose acutely aware of the sensitivities around this whole area, and I know that there's very strong feelings in relation to it. On the role of COSICA, just on Commissioner, we actually are extending that for 2 years, so that hopefully answers that question that you have there. In terms of the remit and role of the office, I'll take that away in terms of is there any other scope, but how it's going to be paid for is the big challenge for us, obviously. Limited resources, and how do you do the right thing in terms of the funding. We're continuing to, this is, I mentioned some of the figures that earlier that we are dealing with in terms of making these payments, but they have to be paid for. We've actually raised the issue with the Secretary of State last week around what potentially their contribution will be, given that a lot of this happened under the period of direct rule, so therefore it stands to reason that a contribution would flow from that. And obviously there's the two sets of payments, the initial payment and then what comes at the end of the public inquiry. So we're looking at quite a quantum of resourcing here, but we're determined to push institutions to pay their part, the British government to play their part, we have to play our part, but we have a big funding gap in which that's our responsibility to try to meet.
Yeah, and just to add to that, the big challenge that we have is, you know, we've got a number of these legacy schemes, and we often call them legacy schemes, but, you know, we're all very aware when you speak to the victims and survivors of these that it's not legacy for them. They're living with it day in and day out, and they're feeling the impact, they're still feeling the pain, and they need other help and support around that. And there's no doubt, like, we want to be as generous as we can be within the confines that we have to work within, and that is why we have made this scheme as flexible. I think when we look across the UK and Ireland, it's the most flexible and straightforward of schemes. We've made that decision, and also the decision to look at that redress being in parallel with an inquiry. This is quite unprecedented that would happen, and we estimate that the cost of that on the current proposals would be around 60 million. But as we've talked about, as Michelle has said, like, we've made this case to the Secretary of State, we've made this case to the Chancellor whenever she was over, albeit I'm not optimistic, I have to say, in terms of getting additional funds from them for that. But the case that we make, I think, is very straightforward, because we are dealing with these issues that happened many decades ago. But ultimately the payment of these schemes is coming out of the block grant that we have and the money that we are being given for everyday services. And there is a tension between those things very often, because of course if you make a decision to spend that money on a particular thing, or to extend or to expand, then that money is coming from some of those current activities. I don't think that's a good position to be in. I don't think it's a fair position for the people of Northern Ireland, and we've made that case to the UK government. They can call on other resources that we can't. That money is coming from our block grant, and the proportion of money that we're getting for those actions announced by the Chancellor and other UK ministers around everyday services. So it is a very difficult decision to make.
Thank you. Timothy, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Afternoon, Ministers. I suppose just a little housekeeping before I get into my questions. I want to ask the First Minister, did you attempt to, or did you meet the Chair before this meeting today? When we look at the history that you had done that previously, and I'm just wondering if that only applies when you're likely to face questions about a sex offender that was working as a Sinn Féin press officer.
Chair, I'm sure you can confirm that we have not spoken before the committee.
No, that's good, and that's encouraging, but it's an
There's
indictment.
one question. Go ahead,
It's
more.
an indictment. No, it's minutes, you said, that we were broke up into today, and you have 13 and Stuart's at 13, so I hope you're fair.
We're chair and deputy chair. I'm in the
with
chair,
this.
so we'll decide.
So regarding that meeting that you've had, You still haven't produced the handwritten notes that have been requested. Are you going to wait until the Information Commissioner's Office tells you to release them before you do?
Sure, I'm not getting engaged in something
No.
that Timothy's competing with the Commissioner's Office. That's beyond our office. We don't take anything to do with FOIs, and it'll do its due process.
A question you maybe can answer for me, First Minister, is are we speaking to the First Minister for all today? Or are we speaking to the First Minister of no alternative that continues to eulogise in terror and attend commemorations?
You're speaking to Michelle O'Neill, First Minister.
We have that cleared up. So moving on to my questions regarding the Quality Commission, which indeed is a budget line that sits under your department. And I want to pick up with you on their bizarre attempts to challenge the Supreme Court ruling. And I'm wondering, First Minister, did you tell the Quality Commission to butt out, or do you only tell unionist MPs that are wanting to raise the issue of your party, Sinn Féin, blocking the MOD coming to a jobs fair in Londonderry?
So, in relation to the Quality Commission, I hope that it gets on with doing its work as quickly as possible, because I think it's important that we get to the point where we have clarity here in terms of the Supreme Court ruling. I think that at the heart of all of this, as in was the first topic that we spoke about today, is compassion. And I think that we have a trans community that feels under attack, and I think it's important that we're very mindful of that whenever we speak. In terms of the Supreme Court ruling itself, the Equality Commission have set out that they have more to do. I wish them well with that, and I hope that we can get to the point where we have consistency applied across all of our public services.
Do you agree with the Quality Commission and their approach? Do you agree with the
I would
Supreme
much
Court
prefer
ruling?
that we
Do you
had,
respect it?
if you let me answer the question, I would agree that I would much prefer that we had clarity in the here and now. However, we do not. It's quite complicated. The Equality Act that was relevant to the Supreme Court doesn't pertain here, so therefore the Equality Commission have work to do. Let them get on with doing their work and let them bring forward advice that we all can look towards.
Moving on to ending violence against women and girls, I've raised this a number of times. My concern regarding the co-design partners, that at no stage was any gender critics involved in the co-design of the ending violence against women and girls. We've had Northern Ireland Women's Rights Network in front of this committee who are very sceptical, and I believe that since they've come here, they've been given a platform, and I trust going forward that future policy documents will reflect the thoughts and have their input. But First Minister, I just wanted to ask you, a number of your officials haven't been able to answer the question, but can you outline what a woman is?
Oh no, I really wish that you were genuinely interested in the topic, but you're not.
I am.
You're here to cause division, and so be it. But that's on you, not
It's up
on
to
the
you.
rest
You
of
can
us.
clarify this.
The rest
You've
of
been
us.
asked a number of times and you've dodged the question. Now's your opportunity.
Stop showboating. But anyway, look, I think that our job here is to create a society that's fair and equal and inclusive. We all await the Equality Commission's recommendation. When you talk about the definition of a woman, you always ask it in relation to the strategy. So we have a very comprehensive ending violence against women and girls strategy that was co-designed with many, many partners, that is very, I think, leading the way in terms of the work that we want to deliver upon here. And the success in it is going to be focusing society's attention on preventative work. And I am so glad to see it in action. I am so glad to see the progress that's being made. And I am so glad to see all of the feedback that we're getting, that it's actually making a difference. But we have an awful lot of a journey to go, but it's going to take all of society working together. But in relation to the strategy, its strategy is a framework intended to address all violence, ending all violence against women and girls. It doesn't get much simpler than that, and if you can't understand it, that's on you.
Deputy First Minister, do you have anything to add at this point?
Just to simply add, I was deeply disappointed, I have to say, not surprised, but deeply disappointed in the Equality Commission advice about this. I think they should have taken the opportunity to stand up for women, and I think particularly in two areas. One is around fairness in sport in particular, but also in terms of safety of women in prisons, safety of women in safe spaces. Those are supposed to be guaranteed under the law, and I think instead that they have got themselves tied up in some issue around no diminution of rights. I think for me as a woman, I never consented to a diminution of my rights to be watered down, to not create those safe spaces and not to create that fairness. So I think that the Equality Commission had different options available to them, and I think we should absolutely fall in line with the Supreme Court judgment that while the substance of that case was around the Equality Act, of course it dealt with the treatment of woman and man as dictionary definitions effectively within legislation. The references within the document is to a woman. I don't accept a redefinition of woman. I don't accept it. I think the vast majority of women don't accept it. It doesn't require people to define it, because to define it is to redefine it within that document, and I don't accept that redefinition. So I think it was a missed opportunity by the Equality Commission. I know what a woman is, I am a woman, and I do think that the Equality Commission needs to just put out some advice that actually stands up for and protects women.
So clear and concise.
Come back in, Timothy. So just one more question, then we need to move on.
Yeah, so clear and concise answer from the Deputy First Minister. The First Minister once again has failed to answer the question, and she talks about ending violence against women, against all women. Would the same apply today, or should the same apply, years ago when the likes of Yvonne Dunlop was murdered in a firebomb attack in my town of Ballymena? In the past, you have eulogised Thomas McElwee. Indeed, I'm looking at a tweet here from the 40th anniversary of his death, where you say that today marks the 40th anniversary of the death of Thomas McElwee after 62 days in hunger strike. Now, I can't understand the next bit, I had to get translated, but what it said is he died for Irish freedom. So you seem very selective in what you want to end violence against women and girls. All violence is wrong, it always has been wrong, but you do this document, you do women a disservice when you can't call out that murder was wrong. You still, to this day, stand over what that man done. And to me, that's a shame on you. It's a terrible indictment in this office. And it just shows
Excuse me, please stop talking. Thank you.
Never work.
Thank you. We're going to let the First Minister respond, then we're going to move on. Go ahead, please.
Sorry, you've heard me saying it on numerous occasions. I regret every single loss of life throughout the conflict. Our job as today's generation of political leaders is to build for the future, to look towards the future, to find ways to heal wounds of the past, to find ways to give families access to truth and justice. I hope that we can get there with the legacy proposals that we're yet to see from both the Irish Government and the British Government. But for me, they must be human rights compliant, and they must be about commanding the support of the maximum number of victims and survivors, including the family of the Dunlops.
Thank you. Carol,
There
please.
was an alternative.
Excuse me, please. Carol, please. Thank you.
So I just want to start off by talking about North Belfast, if you don't mind, because it was raised. So first of all, I appreciate the statement that was made last week. It was appreciated by many people, and I just want to remind people that it was an issue of sectarianism as well, and it was the UDA individuals, although apparently it's not a UDA organisation, still can't get my head around that one, who allegedly are involved in this. So 4 Catholic families have been asked to leave, and now they moved on to people who are not white. And there's talk, or there was mention in the briefing papers we got about community relations, and you've mentioned CIT and others. I mean, apart from political condemnation, which we all do and we're all tired of doing, these people lived in a so-called shared housing scheme, okay? And I know, speaking to 2 of the families, that they have waited years on a home, reared kids, 3 and 4 generations under one roof, got a home, and are getting put out or left. What can we do across almost the same question that Stuart asked about racism? What practical steps can we do to make sure something like this in 2025, that families are barricading themselves into their own home, doesn't happen again? That's my first question. And leading to that is there going to be a review of CIT and certainly the Community Relations Council in the middle of all this as well?
I'm happy to kick off. So I think the scenes that we witnessed, in particular you're talking about North Belfast and your own constituency, I mean, are just abhorrent whenever you look at whether it's families being driven out because of sectarianism being the motivation, or more recently in terms of racism. And to me, those isms are both sides of the one coin. And I think Words matter when things like this happen, but equally, I think that's why it was important that we had a collective executive statement to drive home that strong political leadership message. But then, as I said earlier, we need all of our agencies to be playing their part, because I'm aware that in some cases families were raising concerns that they felt intimidated, that they felt that they couldn't go out onto the street, that they couldn't wear their GAA jersey to walk out on the street. That's not acceptable. That's not the kind of world and kind of society that any of us want to live in. So that's why all the work that we're doing around good relations and identifying areas or issues when they arise, we need all agencies to step up and actually play their part. There can't be any no-go areas for people in our society. We need to create shared space, more and more shared space, and more shared housing opportunities for people. So I think it's collective. The good relations piece, we ourselves, particularly because of the problems that we saw over the summer, have reallocated or secured additional funding to actually go into actual planned intervention projects in particular areas that have been identified. There's so much work going on in the CIT areas, some of which are in North Belfast. But I think we'll have to remember that it's not widespread, but the pocket is one pocket too many, or two pockets is too many. So the stuff that we've been involved with around the Good Relations programme and looking at it, so part of our T-book, I suppose, holistic review will incorporate good relations and what that looks like. But we've been able to secure additional funding for good relations over the last year, but yet no, we're still seeing these things happening. So it's political leadership, it's the agencies stepping up, and I want to commend all of the parties that work together, because I think the multi-agency and multi-party response is the correct response in any of these things.
Yeah, like just to add to that, as I've said, I think a very strong and clear statement by the executive, unfortunately on a regular basis, which is required, which calls that out. I always do, and I will reiterate that, as we know, this is a small minority of people. They cross a line, and that line is crossed into criminality. But from the victim's point of view, in terms of feeling that harassment, that threat of feeling, absolutely that they have no choice but to leave is absolutely wrong. It is a minority. It is a challenge across Northern Ireland in those small pockets, and it's not just in terms of the sectarian issue, on the race issue. I was speaking this morning to a family up in the northwest that are feeling a huge amount of pressure and under threat, an official threat from the PSNI and dissident republicanism because of his work as in terms of anti-drugs and his background in the police, and that is just totally unacceptable. And we do have it, and we have it everywhere. And I would always say that when we look at some of that racism that is played out across the UK and Ireland, it's not just coming from one source. This is something that is bubbling there. I think it's fueled by social media. It's a big challenge for us all to take on. We need to be working with the PSNI, but I think it's also right to say, yes, they need to come down hard in terms of the criminality. I agree with that, not just in these incidents, but in terms of any remaining aspects of paramilitarism as well. But in addition to that, we need to have those programmes that really work. And I know that the junior ministers have been out and about. I think most of you have seen them out and about at various events, particularly in good community relations, talking to people who do a huge amount of positive work with young people and others to change attitudes and to tackle that. But we don't see the positive things very often. We see the bad things, and that work needs to continue.
I accept that, but we're talking about the UDA in 2025, terrorising families in their own home. We're also talking about people who wax lyrical about the safety of women, and it was the women who were barricaded into their own homes because of gangsters who are drug stealing. So let's call it for what it is. Both all the work that you all do, excellent work, and what work are people do on the ground aren't getting to the ears of the UDA. So that's what we need to do. So can I move on, Chair, to my next question? So I've seen the reports in the media, and you mentioned it in your preamble or your opening statement about the commissioners. And so, just to get this right, they've been offered posts, but they haven't been confirmed. That's one part. So, see, in terms of the local delivery unit, will it have a responsibility in ensuring that the Irish language strategy is delivered? Will that work be accompanied by the work of the Commissioner? Because the strategy has been delayed so long, it's went to court twice to have it produced. And then, indeed, all the other strategies that were agreed in a previous negotiation that at the minute are practically denying people their rights. What will happen with those? Will they be, I appreciate they're in another department, but in terms of the overall PFG piece, will they be brought along as well? Because I think it would be a really bad news story to get this agreement on the commissioners, which are really welcomed, and then for a department to sit on another piece or a strategy that's going to give people entitlements and equality. So if you could, maybe you need to go back and get a response, but it's certainly in terms of the success of the PFG.
Yeah, thanks for all of that. I mean, I think I said it in my introductory remarks, and I know some of it's been trailed in the media, albeit it's not all finalised in terms of dotting I's and crossing T's, but we have successfully conducted the recruitment process for the 2 commissioners and the director of the Office of Identity and Culture, and the Irish Language Commissioner, and the Ulster Scots and British Heritage Commissioner as well. So I think that's good work, and we hope to be able to announce that publicly in the coming days whenever we've all that area tied up. I think it's a good development. I think it's a really opportunity. It's a fresh opportunity for us actually, in terms of the makeup of our society is something that's very much changing, and even if you reflect in the last 10 years, we're far more diverse, and that diversity, I think, is a strength. But I don't think that we speak about that enough. So I think that there's an opportunity, I think, with the whole rethinking identity, cultural expression, all within that new office. So that's very much under our responsibility. So I'm glad to be able to speak to progress in that. Obviously, the Irish language strategy, which I hope was delivered, because it's been so long delayed, but doesn't fall under the remit of our department. But it's something that must be delivered upon. It's a previous commitment, and therefore I'd like to see all the strategies out and let us get moving on. We need to move to this space where we have a society that is inclusive, that is respectful of each other, and that we don't denegate the other's cultural expression or identity just because we don't like it or it's not ours. So I think that we have an opportunity to do something better here going forward.
I think the delivery unit is a new concept for us. It's not a new concept, though, as we know in governments elsewhere. And some have been more effective than others. We undoubtedly want the work of the delivery unit to be focused and linked to the programme for government. So in that sense, that strategy is a departmental strategy within the Communities Department. The focus of the delivery unit initially will be on supporting the Health Department to tackle waiting lists in particular. So that engagement has already commenced, and we've had that direct engagement with the Health Minister on that important issue. I said that's why I welcome the 59,000 additional appointments, but I think much more needs to be done and much more can be done in terms of that transformation. So that's the focus of the unit at the moment.
Time's up.
Okay, thank you very much. Sinead, please.
Very obedient.
Thank you very much, Ministers, for coming along today. I suppose one of the key responsibilities of the TAO itself is to improve relations, improve outcomes, and obviously governance. And I know there's a theme been thread through here in relation to delivery. But I have to say I'm really, really dismayed at how toxic this environment is in this place. We've only returned. This is our 3rd day back, and it's not a nice environment. There's a great deal of toxicity, and we can see it quite clearly in minister statements and statements in the Assembly as well. So how will you improve relationships? You are both the leaders, and does those poor relationships exist in your department as the 2 principals?
I think the real question for ourselves is, are we delivering on a day-to-day basis on the issues that we've identified that are our priorities, which is the programme for government? And the answer to that question is yes. I think that Emma spoke of some of the areas. I'm happy to reflect on some more. But since our programme for government was launched, I think we're 18 months into this administration. It's a shorter mandate than ever. So we're halfway through, if you like. And at that halfway juncture, I am proud to say that we've launched a programme for government. I am proud to say that we have secured an additional 1.3 billion in public services, finances for public services, that we have launched our childcare package. We've made huge strides forward. Have we more to do? All day long, absolutely. But 2,500 children are in a preschool funded place this September because of the work that we've advanced across our executive priorities. More families are getting support with childcare, and we want to do more. We have our strategy to end violence against women and girls. McGee, an area which you'd very much be interested in yourself, reports last week say that in the last year, McGee has seen more growth than in the last 10 decades. That's significant achievement in terms of moving forward. We've seen significant pieces of legislation coming forward, the primary care expansion plans, the over 120 million in transformation projects, more to come. So I think we have really built strong foundations from which to build upon, and we're committed to doing that together within our leadership of the Executive Office.
Yeah, and like I often think that, you know, you have to look at the reality of the situation where, you know, we will have differences. There will be differences across all of the political parties. There'll be differences with the opposition. And I think all of us can get frustrated. I can get frustrated when I think somebody's making a political point to get a clip or to get headlines, whatever that may be. We all do. And there's no doubt about that. But I think at the heart of all of this, as the First Minister's outlined, is like 99% plus of time is spent getting on with things, pushing things through the department, trying to get that delivery. I think the key word for all governments at the moment is around delivery because of the frustrations with that. I've said this before in the Chamber. I'm frustrated with that. From a standing stop position to get a new capital project up, going, money secured through all of the processes, through business cases and procurement, and get diggers on the ground is almost impossible now within a single term. Sometimes it's impossible within 2 terms or 3 terms. To me, that's not good enough. I think the people we serve out there want to see delivery. And a large part of what we do is trying to drive that through the system, look at improvements, look at transformation. Those are not things that are going to grab the headlines. And I think that's the frustration. Whenever I look down the list of what has been done, and yet there's a narrative out there because what's picked up perhaps are some of those points of disagreement. And right from the outset, I've said this before, from the first day that we were in, we've said, yes, there are things that we will feel passionately and strongly about. There will be things that we disagree with each other in terms of what we say, how we do things, what we believe. And we have a right to say that, and we should say that, because that's what politics is about. It is about getting out there and saying that, but it's also about working together despite differences. We're never going to be off the same political agenda, but what we can focus on is how do we drive down those health waiting lists? How do we get more money into people's pockets in terms of childcare? How do we, in a difficult economic climate, grow the economy? Those are big things where there's, I suspect, not just consensus between Michelle and myself and the 4 of us, but indeed across this committee. You can see those points of consensus. It's not the stuff that might make it onto the Nolan show in the morning, but it is important stuff to those that are impacted by it.
Yeah, and I can accept that. But however, when you look at Pivotal, for example, that has done a review on the programme for government and measuring some of the outcomes and the improvements made, it was a pretty damning report on the outcomes of the first 18 months of this government. So it's not just us around the tables from all our political backgrounds saying that, but the wider community are not feeling those improvements and do not feel that the measures taken have been successful enough to improve their lives, right across from things from childcare, right across, for the A5 and Lough and other things. People are not seeing that advancement and improvements, and it is really not helpful for example, your leader making comments yesterday about First Minister for All and saying about unsustainable, because if you share the same views as he does, then the manifestation of being able to deliver within your department is very, very poor, and I am concerned about it.
So to respond to some of those points very quickly. So first of all, of course, Gavin, as the leader of the DUP, is entitled to an expressed view, a very important view in my opinion.
Is it your view?
About
because you are the joint leader of this government, and if it's your view as well, I'm concerned that we cannot deliver any good targets and outcomes if you're both locked in to a way that is absolutely toxic. There is no business out there that could do business if the 2 leaders in the boardroom, for example, or directors in the boardroom had that toxic relationship. It just wouldn't work for the business.
So to answer your question, I think people, perhaps those in the media in particular, are obsessed about trying to look at relationships and potential fractures within relationships. I think so much of what we have done has shown that collegiate approach where we have consensus, but also have dealt with where we have differences in a mature way. Michelle will have a completely different set of views than I have. And both of us will disagree at times in terms of the attitudes and the things that we do. I have called Michelle out for things that she has done, and she does the same to me. And do you know what? That's politics. We've got different views. And I think when it comes to the particular issue, for example, Gavin, in my view, in my opinion, is absolutely right to say, well, look, we know people who want to join the armed forces in the Northwest. It's a minority community, but they have rights as well. And to call out that exclusion, now Michelle's not going to agree with me or to Gavin on that, and that is the way it is, because we are not from the same political party. We're very, very different views. But in terms of the pivotal report, I think it is a good opportunity to say, look, this is a challenge for us. Why do people not hear the delivery that's actually happened? Because I couldn't disagree more with that pivotal report. I think it's a nonsense to say things have not been delivered when the facts demonstrate otherwise. You look at childcare, £55 million secured, £8 million worth of benefit already in parents' pockets, 2,500 additional places, up from the 12 or so hours to the full 22.5 hours, 3,000 additional places in terms of SEN. As I said to you, that £60 million plus secured in terms of transformation for SEN. I can go through each area. You look at health waiting lists. What difference has taken place since we came in? Well, 59,000 additional inpatient, outpatients and diagnostic procedures. That is significant for all of those people who are going through that. We secured over 200 million ring-fenced for that waiting list initiative. The North-South waiting list procedures back in place to enable people to get accelerated support. That now widened out to the European Union. Over £100 million of transformation projects through the Transformation Board, agreed by the Executive and out hitting the ground. You look at Lough. If I went out and I said to people, how much money is being invested in Lough this year? How many people could say to me, £20 million has been prioritised across projects and capital to tackle this issue in Lough just this year? That's a significant amount of money. A Lough report agreed by the Executive. Now, if people don't know about it, that is something we need to take on board as well. We need to communicate that better, absolutely. And there is much more to be done. I am not complacent. I am not naive. Things are not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. There's much more for us to do. But it is a demonstration that says if a report is saying nothing has been done, the facts tell us a very, very different story, and we need to get that message out there.
And I think just to respond also, I do think that is absolutely right. When you look at the list of achievements, they are significant, but we are not complacent. We know that they are strong foundations on which we need to build. In your own backyard, we'll be at our third job announcement in recent months. Over 250 jobs being created. That is all as a direct result of change in policies, regional balance being a real feature. You can't ignore the fact that Magee University has now had the biggest change in the last year. These are all direct result of this executive delivering. I think the point around complacency is absolutely right around the fact that we need to think about how do we communicate that better, because you know what doesn't make the news whenever we deliver on these projects? You know what doesn't make the news on an ongoing basis? The successes that we've had to date around ending violence against women and girls and the progress that we're making. What doesn't make the news is that we constantly are out and about and engaging and presenting that united front from our executive. What doesn't make the news is good news and progress and delivery. And when I often hear people speaking about the executive not taking the hard choices, and I hope this is not the space that you're in, I'm not prepared to push hard-pressed households to pay for more while public services are on the decline, and it's not of their making. So people who say make the hard choices, they mean charge people more. That's not how we're going to operate. We're trying to transform and fix public services, change things around, and I think we both will continue to drive home the message that we have made significant progress, but we have an awful lot more to do. Our sleeves are rolled up. We're actually in there day and daily, making a difference, trying to deliver for people, and we'll continue to do so. And ultimately, the people will decide on those delivery points, because we have a programme for government that people can measure at the end of this mandate, and I've no doubt that they will absolutely take that opportunity to do so.
Just one second, right? I think, Pivotal more or less give you a school report card, and it could be doing better, and I absolutely, totally agree with it. Now, there has been advancements made in some areas. It is not been felt in people's lives. I was at a childcare event upstairs today, and you tell them people that it's really everything's hunky-dory, everything's doing well.
I am not saying that.
Don't
so
tell
I think
them,
it is important
you know,
not to misquote that, because
we're
I am
all
absolutely clear.
representatives of our
Good start,
constituencies, and we all know what's
good,
going on.
I think
We
good
all
starts
know
maybe
poverty,
much more needs to be
we see
done,
it.
and we
Yes.
recognise
Thank
that,
you.
and that's why we're talking
Much
about
more.
there's no complacency.
Needs more delivery.
Thank you. I'm going to Brian now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Some questions on growing our economy, which is first priority in the programme for government. Defence spending is increasing significantly across the UK and across Europe in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But in Northern Ireland, defence spending is actually significantly lower than UK average at £100 per head population 2022-23 compared to the national average of £370 per person. On the plus side, First Minister, we do have world-class companies here that form part of the global defence supply chain, so there is huge growth potential for our economy in this sector. Are you pursuing those opportunities with the Labour government?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of this is unclear, but for us, I mean, growing a globally competitive and sustainable economy is written in lights in our programme for government. So that is, are we going to create more jobs? How are we going to ensure that people's standard of living is higher and their wage is higher? So productivity is very important. The Economy Minister set out her plan in terms of the 4-point plan in terms of growing our economy, and that means reaching to all the things that can advantage our local economy.
Okay.
Yeah, and certainly from my point of view, like, it's a difficult global economic climate. There's no doubt about that. There's been a lot of uncertainty out there. That is something that we do need to consider. We touched in question time on Monday on the international relations strategy. The international context is changing on a week in, week out basis. Just today, we've seen that really worrying news around Poland. Poland is now up well over 4% in terms of their defence spend. 4% of GDP. That's significant. They're heading very much towards 5%. And that reflects a serious concern, particularly in terms of Russia. When you look at Ukraine, their defence spend understandably up 34%. But everyone is spending more in defence because we live in an unstable and insecure world at the moment. People are very mindful of that. So sadly, the context is difficult, but there are undoubtedly opportunities for our businesses. I have certainly been pushing the UK government to increase defence spend per head of population. It is only right. That is taxpayers' money on defence, and increasing our defence spend per head of the population is important across the UK, but Northern Ireland should also see the benefit of that. We have excellent aerospace and defence companies here, many of whom have contributed to the war effort in the defence of Ukraine, for example, and elsewhere. So I think this is a key area for promotion for us. We should be championing that. I believe our economy minister should be championing that much more. Just in recent weeks, we've seen the big UK contract with Norway, £10 billion worth of a contract. So it's not just MOD spend with the potential for Northern Ireland. We know that all European countries that have had too low spend as a percentage of the GDP have promised to increase that. So there is opportunity for our companies, and I think we are well positioned to take advantage of that. And I would like to see ministers at, for example, the Farnborough Air Show and other activities as we move forward to really promote those excellent companies that we have.
Thank you. First Minister, for young people who choose to pursue career opportunities in the armed forces, do you consider that to be a legitimate choice?
Because for individuals to decide what career they might decide to take up, whether that be in the British Armed Forces or in as a teacher or as a cleaner in a school or as a caretaker in a school, it's for individuals to decide what career path they may turn.
It is a legitimate choice for them then? Yeah.
It absolutely is everybody's individual choice as to where they might decide to take themselves forward. You are referencing the issue of the British Army in terms of a fair in Derry, which I absolutely agree with the local council decision on, particularly because of the sensitivities around the role of the British Army in Bloody Sunday in Derry. So I think that the reflection of the councillors in the council was a wise one. And there are plenty of other opportunities for individuals who want to pursue a career in that regard to go elsewhere and do so.
First Minister, I've listened to your words today. You talked about wanting to heal the wounds of the past. You spoke about a society which is inclusive. I'm mindful of just yesterday, there were army officers in a bomb disposal unit clearing a security alert in Greig and almost on a weekly basis people welcome the British Army when they come to clear explosive devices. I would put the public at risk. Do you consider Londonderry to be a no-go area for the armed forces?
Let's not get sensationalist.
Is that not what you're saying? Are you saying it's a no-go area?
Let's not get sensationalist.
That's not sensationalist. That's the reality of what you're saying.
The bare facts are, there is a jobs fair in Derry. The local councillors, who have a mandate from the people of Derry City and Strabane, decided it wouldn't be appropriate for the British Army to be at this fair. I think that's a very reasonable approach from those local councillors, and I think that view should be respected. Stop trying to conflate things and make things into something that they're not. I think it's a very reasonable request on behalf of the people of Derry and Strabane.
You just said it's a legitimate choice for young people who pursue it.
But you're also saying... As to is being a teacher,
yes.
As to is going into politics,
but
as to is any other field that someone may want to enter into. It's entirely their own call. It's not my choice.
That political choice.
It's not my choice.
To inhibit the choices of young people.
This is not about...
That's councillors imposing their political views.
Don't ignore...
Sorry, 1 wee second. I think you're badgering a little bit. Can you just refrain
I
a little
do have
bit?
a duty.
Thank you.
Chair.
I'll just say one final word, Chair, on it. The DUP mightn't like the outcome of the local councillors in Derry City and Strabane, but in my opinion it is the right outcome, it is the right thing to do for the people of Derry, and I think that everybody just needs to move on.
I think that's an appalling comment, and I will make that comment. And I think as your party eventually and belatedly change their position on the police service of Northern Ireland, you will eventually accept that people have a right to pursue a career in the British Armed Forces. And many are doing so. And you're not giving the leadership to help society move on. For someone who's talked about healing the wounds of the past, and you're perpetuating the wounds of the past and not challenging people. If I
can comment on that as well. Look, I think, I'm always amazed by the incredible bravery of those who serve our armed forces and sign up to our armed forces. I had the opportunity over the last number of days to celebrate the 125th anniversary of the Irish Guards, and they have a rich and incredible history. Of course, it's a legitimate career pathway. It's a necessary pathway in terms of protecting the United Kingdom, and quite frankly, the protection of the United Kingdom and Ireland, because they are stepping up to do that. And this is one of those issues where I disagree very strongly with the First Minister. The First Minister referenced in her answer to an earlier question that there shouldn't be any no-go zones, no-go areas, and yet the councillors in Londonderry have created a no-go zone for the British Army. Plenty of people have a history. Plenty of people have a very toxic history and not a legitimate history, and yet we are told very often we need to move on and forget about the past whenever that is brought up. And I think it's absolutely wrong to tarnish the armed forces such a way. And people have a choice. There's perhaps those that will not want to join, but there's a minority community up in the northwest with a very strong and proud record in the armed forces. Those young people should not be denied the opportunity by councillors. The councillors themselves, nobody's forcing them to sign up. They don't have to sign up. But they are denying the opportunity to others and to other young people to have that career because of their political views against what would be a legitimate and understandable decision by a minority community. I think that's wrong. There shouldn't be a no-go zone up there. I think the decision was wrong, and it's legitimate for politicians to comment on that.
I have time for one more. Just an essential part of the role of joint First Ministers is engagement with other heads of states and their administration in the interests of the people of Northern Ireland. Surely the United States of America should be at the top of our list, given the amount of investment they bring to Northern Ireland. Whatever one thinks of the current incumbent, they should be at the top of our list.
Surely the starving children of Gaza should be at the top of your list and everybody else's list.
Everyone is
because
concerned
this is the
about
biggest humanitarian
Gaza.
crisis of your time. I'm very comfortable with my decision not to represent this executive at a state banquet in Windsor Castle with President Trump.
That doesn't mean we cut ourselves off from that entire administration, which is the biggest and best
and
in Northern Ireland.
Indeed I do
outside
not.
Of the UK.
Indeed I do not. Indeed I have plenty of engagement with people across American administration and will continue to do so. But at a time whenever the world is looking on at the biggest humanitarian crisis of our time, at a time whenever starvation is being used as a weapon of war, at a time when the world is increasingly moving towards a militarised agenda to the detriment of all the people right across the globe, at this time the priority should be ending the genocide in Gaza. At this time the priority should be every international voice making their voice heard and stopping Israel from acting with impunity. So I think that's what you should be concerned about, and what any right-minded person should be concerned about right now.
And look, from my point of view, like, President Trump is pursuing the same policy in the Middle East and in the region as President Biden. So that's a continuation. And also, as much as we would like to think that we have a huge significance in relation to that issue, quite frankly, us not meeting President Trump will make no difference whatsoever to that issue. And yet, we have to recognise that the US administration is incredibly important to Northern Ireland. I have had the great honour to meet many different presidents of all different political views, many of whom I don't share politics with. But I meet that person because of the office that they hold and the importance to our administration. That is acutely the case where, for example, there are these ongoing fluctuations, decisions, discussions around tariffs. That has a direct impact potentially on our businesses and on our economy, not just in Northern Ireland but across the UK. I was really pleased that His Majesty the King has extended the invitation to the devolved nations and regions, and that includes Northern Ireland, to participate in state visits, because these are occasions where you get to talk to not just, and albeit it may be brief, with the actual president, but it's an opportunity to engage with people right across that administration. In state visits, there's a significant delegation comes with the President. They are tasked with a wide range of work across many different areas, particularly on the economy, but I suspect defence spending and other important defence issues will be on the table as well. So I think it's important for us to be represented. I count it as a huge honour to have the opportunity to do so. And regardless of my personal feelings and also politics, if we only engaged with political leaders we politically agreed with, we wouldn't be talking to too many people very often. So I do think you have to step up and get beyond that.
Thank you. Harry, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ministers, one of the initiatives that has had an impact on local communities is the Urban Villages initiative. Can you tell us how you feel the initiative has worked and how can this be expanded to other areas?
So we are currently looking at urban villages too, if you like, trying to look at build on the success of the previous programme, actively working our way through that actually as we speak. And I think that as part of the wider review of T-Book, this is obviously all part and parcel of that. So hopefully be able to talk a bit more to committee about that at some stage in the future, just in terms of the developing thinking around what an urban village is too. But yes, all the feedback and analysis that we have around the success of those projects really speaks volumes in terms of how we have been successful in making a difference in communities.
Yeah, I think in terms of urban villages, it's one of the signature projects of Together Building a Community, often referred to as T-Book. And as Michelle has said, as we head towards T-Book 2, we're doing a significant evaluation of the original strategy, but also the signature projects. And what we're finding is that huge swathes of that document are still relevant. We would like to see better integration, in my view, and I think it's a shared view, not just about good relations across the two main communities, but of course to integrate new incomers, the social cohesion issues. I think there's a really good opportunity. There's a lot of commonality in terms of the interventions required. So I think that's one big opportunity for this, and our team are working through that. But much of that strategy is fit for purpose. It's very much the key problems, identifying the progress made, but more work to be done. So I think it's a really good opportunity for us to take a look at those signature projects to say, are they still fit for purpose? Across many of them, of course, there will be. We had the sports, we had the summer camps, we've had youth interventions. I think there's potentially more opportunity. We've talked about this around looking at music, building on the Crescendo project and the huge success of that. So looking at a signature project around that. But on urban villages, really good evaluations and what they have achieved. It hasn't been without its bumps, absolutely not. But I do think that we would like to see that project rolling forward. It's all about creating that social capital, increasing social capital within communities. One of the big things, though, for us is the fact that it's not obviously just urban communities. So urban villages, by its very nature, is a urban-based scheme, but we can see some benefit to rolling out the concept of that to also include rural communities and expanding that. So we're looking at what that criteria might look like. Conscious that many people around the room will have had some of those projects in their area, and I think some really good success from those projects, and a lot of learning though from those projects as well.
Oh, sorry, no, go
Ministers,
ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
during the summer, we've seen sectarianism raise its head once again across sections of our communities. Are there any particular initiatives that could be developed to further improve relations in our communities?
I think we've sort of touched on that throughout the session. There's a whole range of things. There's not just one solution here. There's a whole range of initiatives, and I think the more localised they are as well, that's also important in terms of identifying some of the challenges that people know on a very local level. But it's going to take all of society working together again. It's working with our councils in partnership, working with the other statutory agencies. It's about our own strategies being up to date and reflective of the diverse society that we have today. So I think we've got good foundations in terms of which we can build to do even more moving forward.
Yeah, and look, there's big challenges still out there. While the evaluations have been really positive, so well in excess, for example, of over 20,000 young people have been through our T-Buck summer camps. Many tens of thousands of people involved in those projects, and really good evaluation. Problems remain. You only have to look at your own social media. The amount of sectarian abuse that I get on social media is appalling, and you click into their accounts and you see where they're coming from a political perspective, but it's not on, and it shows that there are underlying sectarian attitudes there, and I'm sure that's the same right across the piece. It does need to be stamped out, and we do need to do more around that. And I always say, somebody's doing a bit of an Irish jig upstairs. But
Someone's going to find out.
Yeah, but to me it is about respect and trying to demand that respect for our identity and expressions of our identity, but also given respect as well. I often say in Northern Ireland we're all much more comfortable coming together if it's a mela or there's something else in celebration of the particular identity and cultural expressions of somebody else, as opposed to actually celebrating the cultural identities that we have. I'm incredibly proud of my cultural traditions, and it grieves me when people don't see those cultural traditions in the same way. So I do think it's about education, it's about trying to create that environment of respect, but it's also about doing our displays in a respectful way as well, and I think that requires a lot of work. I often say that this is one of the big outlying areas from the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, how we deal with those very different identities within this space, and it has created those tensions for many decades, and it's a difficult issue to resolve. We don't underestimate how difficult it is, but tackling sectarianism absolutely will continue to be at the heart of that strategy and moving on to the next phase of interventions.
More? Okay.
Yeah, just one more. Go ahead, Harry.
The reshuffle of Labour government ministers provides an opportunity to highlight again barriers and friction for Northern Ireland companies accessing the UK internal market. What representations are you making to highlight those impediments resulting from the Windsor Framework? And if I could also add into that, the Lord Murphy Review has identified many of the ongoing problems but has totally failed to provide any solutions. Will you be meeting the government to address the report's failings? Thank you.
Look, I believe the Lord Murphy Review was a missed opportunity. There's clearly significant challenges. Some of that is based on a misunderstanding and companies asking for paperwork, asking for processes that are not required. Those can generally be worked through, but it does take time and it causes a headache for businesses. But in other cases, there are still those processes that are there. And I will reiterate what I've said many times before. The UK government made a promise to get rid of any barrier to internal UK trade. They promised the people of Northern Ireland, through safeguarding the Union, unfettered internal UK trade. And they have not delivered that. They are letting down the people of Northern Ireland, and they must deliver. I have taken the opportunity at every single engagement that I have had with the Prime Minister, with the Secretary of State and with relevant UK ministers. I have raised the continued problems with the Windsor Framework. It is unnecessary, it's bureaucratic, it's process for process sake. They can easily get rid of this without any danger or threat to the EU single market, and they should do so. It's putting a burden on businesses that is completely unnecessary. So they can get on and get it sorted. I think the government needs to do that and do it urgently.
I think we are where we are because of Brexit, and we are where we are because we now have a Windsor Framework that puts us in a completely different scenario. So, I welcome the fact that there are ongoing efforts to try to resolve any issues that are barriers to trade. That just makes good common sense. And I think we just continue to advocate that, and know that the Economic Minister is doing so in terms of working with the local business organisations, highlighting the real genuine issues that potentially have arisen. But you just need pragmatism here, and we need to find solutions, and we need to give businesses certainty. And that means finding solutions where we can improve things. I do welcome the more general reset between both the British Government and the EU in terms of moving forward. That's going to be crucially important if we're going to get an SBS agreement, and hopefully we can get there as soon as possible, because that in itself will answer some of the challenges that we have in a post-Brexit reality. These are the issues, the challenges that we have. But I think the Murphy Review we have to consider in more detail, and we won't have an agreed position on this, but dual market access is a huge significant advantage for us. You just need to look at the recent evidence from some companies like Denry in terms of the fact that they have taken access or taken a great opportunity in dual market access, and lots of our companies can do likewise. So we just need to grab the opportunity that we have with that dual market access with both hands, whilst working out the practical day-to-day things that we can actually resolve. But that means just working consistently with this Labour government. You asked about relationships. I mean, I have no truck with this Labour government in London. They are the Tories in another version. When you look at the austerity agenda, they have reached for militarisation over pensioners. They have reached for militarisation over welfare payments. So I think the agenda of this Labour government is certainly in question, but that's for those people that vote for them to analyse. For my part, it's their role. Yeah, for my part, it's their role in the Good Friday Agreement and their co-guarantor role as of the Good Friday Agreement and working with the Irish Government in that regard. That's where I suppose that's how I would engage with that British Government as well.
Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you.
Apologies. I'm just conscious there's two more people to go in.
Yeah.
Claire, please.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I appreciate the focus on delivery. However, if you're not here, that delivery is not going to happen. And certainly, as one of three members on this committee who isn't represented on the executive, observing it from the outside in, this executive does look volatile. And certainly from my perspective and my constituents' perspective, I do believe it would be unforgivable if we didn't see out the end of this mandate. And I would really like to see commitment from both of you, and I'm hearing it, that you will do every effort to ensure that that doesn't happen. I don't think it's just coming from the media. I don't think it's just coming from people who want to create mischief. One of your government ministers yesterday wrote to another one of your government ministers in relation to an issue which I believe should be talked about around the executive table. There may be four parties, but there's one government, and I don't see any form of collective responsibility. I think even listening today, it's disappointing at how divided, how polarised you seem to be. So I would certainly want reassurance that we do everything that we can to see out this mandate, because ultimately delivery is legislation. It falls if this falls. Ultimately it's actions on the ground. It's not strategy. Strategies is a starting point, but we need to get to the point of implementation, which is the most critical thing that you can do, and it is your job, it's our job. I agree with other comments. In the last number of days, weeks, months, it feels so toxic, and the people out there don't want to see that from us. They're fed up with us. They're fed up with us of 6 years of no government that has created the disgrace that's in public services that exists now. And we will not improve public services if we continue to delay the transformation. So, do you want to speak to that?
Okay, well, thanks for that. I can assure you that I'm here to make politics work. Okay. I can assure you that I'm here to see this mandate out, and I can assure you that I am determined, despite all of the challenges and the limitations of a devolved administration with limited fiscal powers, that I am here to do our best, to work with others to do our best for citizens. And I do think that we have made a good start in terms of the delivery points, but we're not telling people that enough, and we need to do more. But we also need to build upon what's been achieved. So just to say that, to slightly disagree with you, I will say that yes, the institution's not been up, obviously, is a factor. But we had almost 14 years of Tories and 14 years of Tory austerity, and they really decimated our public services. We're trying to build something from a very broken standpoint. That's going to take time in terms of the transformation agenda. But I think we mentioned some of the projects earlier on. There's really exciting transformation projects already in play, and more to come in the autumn. So I suppose that will take a bit of time for people to see a real tangible difference. But ultimately, politics is about delivering for people, and I want people to feel that it's different. So we need to continue to roll up our sleeves and make that so, and actually let them see, that let us build upon the advances that we've made on childcare. Let them see the level of investment that we've put into Lough now, because it is so significant in terms of both resource and capital funding and the whole myriad of issues that goes along with that. But let them see waiting lists continue to come down. Let them see a difference to their lives. That's what I believe that we are absolutely committed to doing together. I think that we all take responsibility for different things that are said and etc. Also, I made the point earlier, media thrives on that as opposed to the good news bit. So we all have lifting to do, I think, in terms of trying to communicate better to the public that we're here to serve them.
Like absolutely. Most of us can be feisty at times. I'll hold my hands up and say I can be feisty at times as well, depending on the issue. But it is about, as Michelle has said, trying to work together on those big issues where there's consensus. On reflection, even just taking today, I don't think it comes as any surprise to anybody that there's different views on some of those issues. We don't agree on the definition of woman. We don't agree on whether or not the council should have excluded the army. We don't agree on the Windsor framework. I don't think those things are a big surprise to anybody, and there's going to be a lot of issues where we don't agree in that political space. And undoubtedly, that's the politics of it. Those issues are big issues, and they're talked about out there. I said, we will take positions, and I think it's right as well. If one of us, if we do something that the other disagrees with, then we will call that out, and you do call it out. That's what people would expect as well. But ultimately, an awful lot of this, as we've said, is about a focus on consensus. I'm really pleased that we'd got the first programme for government agreed, that any executive got agreed, I think, in an 11-year period. And the approach that we took to that was very much to say, what are the issues where there's consensus? What are the big issues for people on the ground in terms of health and education and growing the economy? There are challenges. The fiscal environment is challenging. We're not anticipating good news, and we're not getting any additional money, in our view, come the budget from the Chancellor in late November. So therefore, we have to look at what we're doing and try to do that in a way which actually delivers for people. The global investment environment is poor, so therefore we're not in a series of a huge number of announcements and positive good news week in and week out. Our services need transformation. That is not an easy task, and we are prepared to do that work. Michelle is absolutely right. When people sometimes accuse the executive of not making the hard decisions, and when you question them to say, what are those hard decisions? They talk about, introducing new rates or charges for people. They talk about closing hospitals. They talk about those types of things. And we're listening to people. We understand how tough life is at the moment with the cost of living pressures that people are seeing, with the childcare costs, with other costs increasing. So, yes, there are decisions that we're not going to take. That doesn't mean we're not taking other decisions which are difficult and are challenging and are trying to deliver. So to reassure you, our focus is on that delivery against those 9 priorities. Those are the agreed priorities of 4 parties. I would challenge any country in the world to be able to work in a 4-party coalition in a quick way. It's not an easy system to operate, but we do have that determination to do that by working together. Doesn't mean we'll not have the odd fight. It doesn't mean that there'll not be those big issues and big political issues, but that is wholly different, in my view, to the work we're trying to do within those departments and bread and butter issues. I have been asked about strategies at times that have been agreed and out, and people don't know about it, even people in that assembly, and the reason they don't is because they were agreed and out and there wasn't that controversy and it wasn't covered, and that's a challenge. It is a challenge for us, because an awful lot of what we get agreed, like I've said to you, over 150 papers through that executive, 150 decisions on issues made by that executive agreed in the mandate already. That's a significant amount of work across many, many different policy areas, and it does demonstrate that consensus working.
Ministers, 10 murders in the last 10 weeks, women, men and children. We have an ending violence against women and girls strategy. I suppose I would put it to you that the focus with that is on the victim, even in its title. We have a big problem with male violence in Northern Ireland, because certainly in those 10 of those cases, 8 out of the 10 men are connected to that. how do we really drive that message home, and how do we change that? I appreciate this is a wider societal change, but it's difficult to feel like anything is genuinely happening when we have such a horrific statistic presented to us in a matter of weeks.
So I think from the outset of the strategy, we knew that it wasn't going to be something that you could flick a switch and it would all be automatically better. I only wish that was the case. But I do think, like we mentioned being in Craigavon at the weekend or on Friday, and for me that was their first year back, and that whole cohort of boys that came along to listen, to know to understand what their role is in this. And I think it's important that we take them with us, because at the heart of the strategy is around prevention, and it's about that early intervention. So it's about education in schools, it's about what you hear in the sports club room or whatever. It's about reaching people where they are. But that's why I think the success of the programme, which I suppose is going to take a number of years before we can actually see real tangible difference, but if we can actually get to that point where we have a real preventative approach around this misogyny that we see that's so ingrained in our society, then I think that's when we start to see a real difference. But some of the projects that we've got feedback on are really going right into a local rural community, for example, Clonmore Youth Club, different projects that we've seen, and that's actually just talking to the young fellow off the street that's come up to the GAA club, or whether it's another club that's come up to the soccer club, and talk to them about their role in all of this. And then I'm hoping that they're growing up with a very different mindset than those that are older than them. So I think I wish we had a quick fix to this, because it just gets very scary whenever we start to see the level of violence, and it is male perpetrated violence. So we have to reach young boys. Some of that active bystander campaign I think has been very successful, and I don't have the figures right in front of me, but some of the analysis that they've done already around the number of impressions, so the number of people who watched it on TikTok or Facebook or Instagram, is quite significant, and the demographic breakdown is also quite significant. That has to be on repeat if we're going to get a message through.
Mm-hmm. And it's a significant scale. Any death is a death too many, and I'm very conscious as well. Like, we often talk about the deaths of women and girls, and at the event in Craigavon the names were read out, and they went from the unborn babies, toddlers, right through to women in their 80s. So this doesn't discriminate. It doesn't discriminate on age, it doesn't discriminate on location, it doesn't discriminate in class. This is something that visits too many women right across. And it really struck me when I was listening to the McNally family, and one of her brothers had said, we just never thought in a million years that this would ever happen to us, that we would be a family in this circumstance where our sister has been murdered, that, in terms of, and that is so true, and I'm no doubt that every family feels that. And it's not just the deaths. I read just this week that, since 2020, 92 attempted murders of women and girls in Northern Ireland since that. And it's a common issue. It's not just here, it's across, but it's a big issue to try to tackle. Over 29,000 domestic abuse reports, and in that, well in excess of 70% of that being perpetrated by men in that environment. So we do have to think that any murder, male or female, it's wrong. There's a particular issue in terms of male violence, particularly within relationships and with partners. It's not an easy issue to tackle, and it has to start at an early stage. There are attitudes and issues that are coming through that end up with a minority, and it is, of course, again a minority, but a minority of people carrying out these appalling things. So, I think this has been a positive process in terms of being inclusive on the co-design. I think all of our partners in this are deeply frustrated at the continuation of this, but it doesn't in any way mean that we are going to be desisted from the work, and we will continue to roll that out. We will also learn from the ground. We will learn about what's working and then to roll that out. And in terms of male targeting of that, we've got the research, but I'd also read, for example, of I think it's Mid and East Antrim. I'd picked up on some of that local council funding and supporting through White Ribbon, working, for example, with young soldiers, young members of the armed forces, in terms of some of that work around what healthy relationships look like and different issues. So there's really good examples coming through, and hopefully we'll be able to replicate that and to target that a little bit better in terms of the underlying issues.
Okay, thank you.
Question?
No, sorry, I really have to move on. Anya, please.
Thank you, Chair. Look, and thank you both for coming in and briefing us today. I suppose I'm going to keep on the topic of violence against women and girls. And I just want to mention, obviously, the horrific events that happened in my own constituency in July that led to the deaths of Vanessa White and her 2 children, James and Sarah. I'd like to put on record my acknowledgement and thanks to the First Minister, who came down to offer her support to the local community at that time. And I suppose the deaths have brought more urgent and uncomfortable questions for us all across society about what we are doing to actually address it. I suppose in terms of, I think it was the First Minister, you mentioned some of the funding streams that has been allocated by the department to date. Could you give us a sense of what those schemes were made up of?
Yeah, so I think some of this, I mean, firstly, obviously what happened in Maguire's Bridge is just horrific, and as a mummy and a granny, I can't even imagine what that family are going through, all the impact what that would mean to any family to be able to comprehend and deal with that scenario. I think if there's one thing that we can talk about that unites us, it is the issue of ending violence against women and girls. And I was struck myself to be in Maguire's Bridge, and I walked with a representative of each of the parties, and that to me sent a very strong message that this is something that we are collectively committed to prioritising and targeting. So we talked earlier about some of the figures, like the initial funding that we had secured, the 3.2 million that was immediately got out onto the ground, and we can see it making a real difference already. The money that's went to the more regional, bigger organisations, that they say is making a huge difference already, and we've identified additional funding then that we also have allocated as well to help build on what's been achieved. But the junior ministers even have chaired the meeting recently of the End Violence Against Women and Girls group, and all the organisations that are represented there, and every one of them are reporting progress around the actions, and particularly around the projects that they are involved in, because it has to hit across all areas. Like there's groups now on different topics, particularly around education. It's so important that young people are made aware of what's a healthy relationship from a very early age. Those things are crucially important. So there's been a lot of good work done around Respect, Inspire, Support, Empower programme, which is a key stage 3 programme, and it's good to see that, because if we can get these young people at that very early age, when their minds are much more of a sponge, then we're actually landing that message, and I think that's important. But I mentioned Clonmore Youth Club, again looking at leadership skills, tackling attitudes. You have the White Ribbon campaign expanding its Listen, Learn and Lead programme. You've got Youth Action. Like, there's so many good things that are happening, and I just think that we need to build upon those things and actually go and meet young people where they are. I think it's important, because you're shaping them, and you're reaching them because you're going to them. We think that's why the Local Change Fund is actually really important.
Yeah, and important to emphasise as well that there's a really good communication and read across with the domestic and sexual abuse strategy brought forward by health and justice departments. So officials within that team sit on the body for hours, and in violence against women and girls sit on that. So that's obviously a wider piece, but there's a huge read across. We know that very often for many women, the most sort of dangerous person to them is their partner, in terms of what can happen. So, and very often there's a history of domestic abuse there as well. So, there are ways that we can work in collaboration. I think it's such an important thing. It's one of the things that we are looking at through the programme for government, and hopefully next time we're in front of the committee we'll be able to talk a little bit more about how we are trying to break down those silos within departments, and really just try to crack those cross-departmental teams to make sure that we're looking at this in the widest sense, because it is an issue that it's not an issue that can be solved by the executive office. Of course it's not. There's a justice element, there's a health, there's a communities element, there's an education element. So this is truly an issue where all departments are involved in it, but also where I think there's really strong political consensus across all of the parties. And I think at the end of this term, if there's an issue where we can say, look, we've worked together and we've really pushed forward in this agenda and made a difference, this is one which hopefully we'll be able to stand together and say.
And I suppose that cross-departmental piece is going to be key, especially within education, justice and health, and about getting young people, especially as you said, First Minister, when their minds are like a sponge, or you can shape them. Just to stay on the programme for government in relation to the commitment to the redevelopment of Casement Park, as well as investment into grassroots sports, could we get an update as to where Casement's at?
So obviously we had new momentum in the project when we had the allocation of 50 million from the British government a number of months ago now, so that I think gave us a bit more understanding and certainty around the funding envelope that we're working with. So if you look at all the funding that's now being committed thus far, you're talking about 170 million being allocated. So this is an executive flagship project. It's just time to get it built. It's time to move on and allow us to work together to invest in sport as a great enabler of building communities and investing in people. So I want us to invest in sport across the board, but I certainly want us to get on to delivering upon Casement Park, because it's going to bring such a significant benefit, not just for Belfast, but obviously for much further afield in terms of Gales. So I think it's important because of the job creation that it brings, and then just what it means for investment in sport. I know that the Communities Minister is going to be making an announcement around soccer investment over, what day is it today? Tomorrow. And these are all good things. We just need to continue to build upon it. Let's get Casement Park done. Let's end the delay, and let's find the way forward here, which is absolutely within our grasp, and I'm determined to work with others, including the Sports Minister, to ensure that we get to that juncture.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I suppose, apologies that the session went on a long time, but I think that we covered a lot of ground, and I would like to think that you will accept an invitation to come back to committee within the next couple of
Conscious we didn't allow the junior ministers to speak at all, unfortunately, after all of their preparation.
Yeah, I know, but we'll be issuing an invitation. I had a couple of other queries, but they can come in correspondence. I'm sure others will, but thank you for now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, members, we'll maybe summarise this, and then we'll have a quick break, 5-minute comfort break. Okay.
Go to the loo. I drink too much water. It's my problem.
Will we take 5 minutes and then come back?
Please.
Okay, we'll take 5 minutes now, please. And we'll come back. The ground, and it's very worthwhile. We didn't get a chance really to recap, or if there were any follow-up actions that we want to follow up with the department.
Yeah, so I put a couple down,
Okay.
Chair. So see the stuff, the review that we're talking about into good relations, T-Buck. Have you got that as well, Nick?
I have that as well. Yeah, we'll ask for an update.
And CRC, so there's that,
CRC,
and then some of the things that kind of just mentioned, but there's no point in asking about it, but just to come back. Yeah. See if we could get some more information on the AI and digital office, because it's a bit vague. It just mentioned it.
Should we actually be inviting that new officer maybe to?
You could do. That would be dead on.
Maybe a written briefing from first.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Carol.
Yeah. And then really just see the local change fund. Just that, because it's hard to keep tabs of some of it. Yeah.
Money's gone. Timothy, just one wee second. I didn't go to the question because I knew we could write, but it's really about where they are in terms of sign-off, bringing the investment strategy to executive for discussion and approval, because that is meant to sit alongside the programme for government in terms of the capital element of it. So we're now 8 months on or something like that, so I think we could ask for an update. Go ahead, Timothy.
A couple of things on the local change fund. Deputy First Minister had mentioned a Mid East Antrim white ribbon. My understanding is that they have only given out their money in the last couple of weeks. So if we could go back to actually find out, so councils, some of them have responded.
Yes.
Some of them haven't. But we need to understand what range of projects and activities are being funded. And I think it was your point, Chair, where the extra money has been allocated out, and we still haven't got to a place where we've been able to examine and get feedback on what that money has originally went to. I'm concerned that Mid East Antrim have taken so long to get that money out, bearing in mind the summer of unrest we've had. And I think there needs to be more urgency put on councils when they do get the money, more oversight of what they're going to provide. Lough was mentioned, about £20 million will be spent on the Lough this year. My natural reaction to that was on what? It's the first time I've heard that figure. So if we could get some more detail on the breakdown of what that £20 million is, when they'll be coming back, I think it's important if we nail down. The two junior ministers didn't get a chance today, so this committee has talked about at length of what really are the junior ministers, what all are they leading on, and we didn't get a chance today to really explore that. So it might be a case of looking at, well, can the junior ministers come on their own session to present to committee? I suppose the last thing, Chair, I wanted to raise with yourself was the timings that was allocated to everybody today. I got significantly less time.
I think you did.
Than other members.
I checked the clock, you didn't actually.
Another,
And you forgot to set your own watch because your timer was still stuck at 0 when you finished.
well, there was another committee member took down all the timings from today, and I was significantly less than a lot of the
I don't
rest
think
of
you
them.
were. You could ask it. You could ask a large number of questions.
But you said it was divided into time, and all I'm asking for is fairness.
Yeah, well,
Well, I thought I was fair today. Anybody else want to?
it just shows, follow on the point about the junior ministers, I think it was difficult, it was a very long session and they didn't get an opportunity to contribute, but I think our inroad there is that the First and Deputy First Minister indicated to us that they were taking responsibility for the mother and baby home legislation.
Yeah.
So if we use that as a hook to get them in, I think we should ask for them to come back to us sooner rather than later and put that on as a specific item.
Yeah, the forward work programme does include a potential future evidence session with either the juniors or FMDFM before Christmas. I think it's the last meeting before then. So that is something that is in the diary and will happen, and they are aware of. Whether the committee would rather just see the junior ministers at that point is something we can discuss in the future. But certainly that date is set.
I think we need to look at it as an additional evidence session and not instead of the First and the Deputy First Ministers coming.
Yeah, I agree. Should be so.
Happy with that? We'll go back to the department on that then, yeah.
Any other things to raise that we'd like to put a query in?
Sorry, Chair, there's just two things.
Oh, sorry,
that was also
thank you.
raised just about the scope to enhance the role of COSIGA.
Yes.
And then the commissioned research for ending violence against women and girls. You had asked a question about the timescale and the author for that. Although the department have literally sent an update in about the strategic framework as we've started today, which will be in Friday's pack, but just to get those questions answered.
Yeah, that's right. I think the First Minister did say that they would come back to us on the commissioning of the research.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Chair, I don't know if it was covered, I was slightly late there, but the delivery unit was mentioned a number of times by the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister, and its prioritisation. Now the concentration about waiting lists. I mean, surely that delivery unit can do more than one thing at a time. And what are, they indicated that there was a small number of priorities for the delivery unit, and what are they? And is it been led and chaired by the ministers themselves? Because it has to be, it has to be from the highest level of government in terms of delivery. I mean, I am really concerned that, the fight back about delivery, because, surely this isn't as good as it gets. There is a general acceptance, in the places that I represent, that things are not as good as they should be. They're not as good as they were promised. And therefore, I think, a lot depends on that delivery unit picking up some of the major projects and running with them, and actually making sure that people feel it in their lives, that improvements have been made. So I would like to know more about the delivery unit. What are the priorities, and what are the outputs, and what are the targets, and what is the data that they're marking and the evidence that they're marking themselves against? And we had a lot of kind of softness around it, but not actual real data. And I was concerned about that.
No, I agree with you, and I suppose just conscious of a couple more sessions to go through, but so we can ask for the written update, but I wonder is this maybe an opportunity for us to ask the head of the civil service, who is responsible for all that programme for government across all the departments, to maybe come and speak to this, because they did. It wasn't just about TO responsibilities, so a lot of the talk was about the executive delivery as
Not
a whole.
website that was up that was shared with us at the time about the delivery unit.
And the delivery unit are coming before the committee on the 22nd of October as well, those officials.
Okay, well, Okay. Right, we'll move on. Thank you. So we have got our next session, which is the inquiry and redress scheme bill, and it's about the raise oral briefing. So again, I'd seek your agreement that Hansard record this session. So we refer you to pages 149 to 150 of your pack for the Clarke's brief, pages 3 to 85 of the table pack for the raised briefing paper on the inquiry, pages 86 to 100 of the table pack for the raised PowerPoint presentation, and pages 151 to 260 of the pack for the raised briefing paper on the redress scheme. So thank you. Just Thomas Lough, Michael Greig and Karen Clarke, who are all researchers here and responsible for pulling together these papers for us. Okay, members, just to advise, the briefing will be split into two parts. The first part will provide members with information on areas related to the inquiry and redress, and the second part will focus on the financial element of the bill. And I'm going to invite our witnesses to speak to their papers. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Nice to see you all again, and thanks for having us here to discuss the bill. Well, actually, there's three of us here, so we'll kind of split it into the three parts. So Michael will take you through the inquiry part of the bill. I'll take you through redress, and then Karen will discuss the financial implications, and then we're happy to try and answer questions after that as well. So just a couple of brief things on the briefing before we start. Given time constraints, we've already had a long afternoon. We don't intend to cover every clause in the bill in this session, or every potential scrutiny point from the papers that we've drafted. So we'll go through some of the clauses, notably the ones covering areas where there was particular interest from the TEO public consultation responses, or where maybe there's a larger number of potential scrutiny points. But obviously the papers do cover the bill in full, so hopefully those are helpful for you and the Assembly as a whole.
Sorry, Thomas, just before you go on, are we speaking to PowerPoint? Is there a PowerPoint?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I haven't.
Oh, sorry. No, I'm just conscious that is it your end, or do we need to?
Sure. Sorry, I will open this up.
Okay.
There we go. There we go.
Okay, thank you. Please
Sorry about
continue, Thomas. Thank you.
No worries. There's also in the bill paper an executive summary at the start, which is hopefully helpful in terms of some of the main scrutiny points that we found within the bill. And just to thank the officials in TEO for their engagement in answering some of our questions while we were preparing these papers as well. That was much appreciated. Again, we don't intend to go through the background to the bill because I think you're all very well versed in that. So if you're happy, we'll just get straight into the bill itself. And I'll pass to Michael to cover the inquiry section.
Right, thanks, Thomas. Thank you, Chair, and hello, everybody. As Thomas mentioned, I won't go through the inquiry clause by clause, but instead I'll be drawing your attention to the clauses of particular note, any relevant scrutiny points, aspects of the public consultation, and finally a comment on burial grounds as well. Nonetheless, if any of you do have any questions relating to the other clauses or the other points that are raised relating to those clauses, very happy to take those questions when we get to them. I just want to say as well that a couple of changes were made to page 3 of our bill paper, hence why the pack was re-released shortly before this meeting as well. So the first clauses that I'll be mentioning cover the inquiry itself. Clause 1 establishes the Truth Recovery public inquiry into systemic failings of institutions and public bodies between 1922 and 1995. It is inclusive of those years. It excludes the matters already examined by the Historical Institutional Abuse, or the HIA inquiry, and while the inquiry may consider the ongoing effects of individuals after 1995, it cannot extend the time frame of the inquiry itself. Clause 2 establishes that the terms of reference are to be prepared and published by the Executive Office. Clause 2.2 explicitly lays out that the inquiry will, and I quote, determine whether, and if so, to what extent there are any systemic failings by prescribed institutions, public bodies or other persons. The bill and the explanatory financial memorandum do not provide a definition of systemic failings. The definition used by the HIA inquiry is referenced in the paper, And from our consultations with TO officials, they clarified that systemic failings will be defined by the chairperson. This was the same approach that was used during the HIA inquiry. Additionally, the HIA legislation stated that any amendments to the terms of reference requires the approval of the Assembly. This has not been included in the bill as written. Currently, any amendments made to the terms of reference by TO can only be done after consultation with the chairperson and after consideration is given to the Truth, Acknowledgement and Accountability Report. Changes do not require approval by the Assembly, and so the committee may wish to scrutinise this particular area. The Truth, Acknowledgement and Accountability Report recommended that the terms of reference includes investigations into financial operations of the institutions as well. These recommendations are not explicitly included in the bill, so the committee may wish to consider whether or not they should be incorporated into the terms of reference as currently written. Other responses to the public consultation felt that the inquiry should be following a human rights-based approach. TO has indicated that while human rights are central to the inquiry, a sole focus may limit the scope of what the inquiry can consider. Clause 3 provides a definition of prescribed institutions, with provisions for additions to those institutions by regulation. Institutions are added to the list to be investigated by the inquiry, but are not included in the original terms of reference, are not automatically covered by the redress scheme. So the committee may wish to consider the potential risk for raised expectations among victims and survivors who are in these subsequently added institutions. Clause 4 contains definitions of relevant persons. This includes any person admitted to a prescribed institution, a person born while their mother was under the care of an institution, and a person whose mother was under the care of an institution until immediately before their birth. At this point, I just want to point out that the EFM defines under the care of as a broad term only that encompasses all types of care without a value judgment on the quality of that care. Clause 4.2 provides TO with the power to exclude certain individuals who may satisfy the conditions of being a relevant person, but outside the scope of the inquiry. The committee may wish to seek clarification on how these exclusions will be applied. I'm going to skip ahead a few clauses, so I'm not going to cover the rest of the clauses relating to the inquiry. This includes the appointment of the panel, assessors, advisory panel, suspending the inquiry and ending the inquiry, to name but a few. But again, please do let me know if you have any questions relating to these ones. Clause 13 discusses evidence and procedure. So 13.3 and 13.5 enable the inquiry to take evidence via a live link. While this may help facilitate participation in the inquiry, for example, people not based in Northern Ireland, there is a risk that older victims and survivors and those with limited digital access may be disadvantaged from joining the inquiry. So the committee may wish to ask what support will be provided to these individuals. Clause 15 empowers the Chair to impose restrictions on public access and disclosure. This includes overriding any confidentiality restrictions. So the committee may wish to consider whether safeguards are sufficient to balance transparency with privacy rights and ensure this power is used proportionately. Clause 16 deals with the power to compel, by notice, witnesses and evidence, and that these notices are supported by enforcement measures and offences. I just want to note that the Department's Human Rights Impact Assessment states that the power to compel evidence may engage Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which is the right to respect a private and family life. The committee may wish to consider whether the bill balances the need to compel evidence versus an individual's right to a private, personal and family life. Again, I'm just going to skip forward to Clause 21. The clauses I have skipped deal with inquiry reports, but Clause 21 enables the chairperson with the approval of TO to award amounts to cover witness expenses. The EFM explains that TO will set out the broad conditions under which expense payments can be made, but the committee may wish to seek assurances on the fairness and transparency of these conditions. The last clause that I'll discuss is Clause 27. This enables TO to make rules relating to the inquiry. These rules are subject to negative resolution, meaning they are not subject to scrutiny. And whilst this does align with the Inquiries Act of 2005, the committee may still wish to consider whether or not any scrutiny of these rules is appropriate under this clause. The last point I would like to make is around the evidence base of deaths and burial grounds. Whilst this is not explicitly mentioned within the bill, the public consultation document stated that as present there are no specific sites within Northern Ireland where there is evidence of large-scale, apparently illegal burials. Therefore, new substantial powers of entry or exhumations are not being considered. And the inquiry will rely on the powers that I mentioned under Clause 16, which is the power to require the production of evidence. There is a private members' bill currently out for consultation, the Private Cemetery Status Burial Protection Bill from Neil McAllister. In the consultation, it states that an archaeological study of Milltown Cemetery indicates that the size of the mass graves there may be being underestimated. One of the recommendations in the Truth and Accountability report was that the inquiry does commission a geophysical and archaeological investigation of former institutional sites with the aim of ascertaining whether or not there is the presence of otherwise unmarked graves. So the committee may wish to take into account that there are other sources that indicate that the extent to which grave sites are being underestimated do require any further investigation. There are a few other recommendations that have been made in the Truth, Acknowledgement and Accountability report. These are all laid out in section 5 of the bill paper. I'll briefly mention just a couple more of the recommendations laid out there. They recommend that the inquiry should lay out procedures to seek the maximum possible participation in its investigation of victims and survivors and their relatives. Whilst Clause 10 does authorise the chairperson to appoint an advisory panel made up of relevant persons, aka victims and survivors and their relatives, the committee may still wish to inquire about other methods used to maximise victim and survivor participation. It also recommended that the chairperson of the inquiry be appointed from outside the jurisdiction of Northern Ireland. The report also states that TO should seek nominations from victims and survivors for a list of potential chairpersons, and so the committee may wish to consider how this process will be followed. That is all I'm going to say on the inquiry at this juncture, so I'll pass back to Thomas, who will take you through the redress payments presented in the bill.
Thanks, Michael. We'll go through some of the clauses relating to redress service, which are clauses 30 to 42 of the bill, and also schedules 1 to 4. So the organisational responses to the public consultation from TEO focused a lot, as you can probably imagine, on the eligibility criteria and that side of things, which I know is something that the committee has a lot of interest in as well, and as do stakeholders and victims and survivors. The majority of what I'll talk about is around those eligibility criteria. Those are set out in clause 31. And that sets out the criteria through which the redress service would consider an application, as well as providing for the payment amounts to which an eligible person would be entitled. As you'll know as well, the bill's provisions set out that redress would provide for standardised payment, and as TEO have noted, this recognises the impact that admission to institutions has had and continues to have on lives of victims and survivors, and that there will be an individually assessed payment following the inquiry, which will be a harm-based scheme as opposed to the one in this bill, which is an admittance-based scheme. The proposal for those two payment schemes reflects part of the Truth Recovery Panel's recommendation for redress, and it was supported by the majority of respondents to the public consultation. However, the panel's recommendation goes further than what's been proposed in the bill, and it says that the scheme should include all women who spent time or gave birth in a mother and baby institution, Magdalene Laundry, Workhouse or other related institutions such as private nursing homes, and all those born to girls and women whilst institutionalised. The bill's proposals for redress would only cover victims and survivors in some of those scenarios laid out in that recommendation. Schedule 2 of the bill, which is in page 49 of the paper, I'm not sure what page that is in your package, but page 49 of the paper, that sets out relevant institution and relevant years. Those institutions listed are a number of mother and baby homes and Magdalene Laundries, but there are no workhouses or other related institutions listed in that section. Notably, the independent panel's consultation response mentions a further mother and baby institution that they believe should be included in redress. That's Clarke in Lough. That came to the panel's attention through a victim survivor who engaged with their process. Despite the suggestion this be included within that list, as Schedule 2, the bill does not list Clarke. So the committee may wish to ask TEO why this institution hasn't been added and what consideration has been given to its addition. A number of organisations also who responded to the public consultation wanted a wider scope for eligibility of the standardised payment. Whilst the bill doesn't list every institution that people were wanting included, paragraph 2 of Schedule 2 does allow TEO to make regulations to add or remove an institution, so that power exists, and those regulations would require the approval of the Assembly. So in terms of the institutions that aren't included in that list that there has been some criticism over, as I said, it doesn't provide redress for victims and survivors who spent time in or gave birth in or were born to someone admitted to a workhouse. The independent panel, in their response to the consultation, suggested women who gave birth in workhouses and were separated from their children should be included, as well as those children now adults. WAVE were also critical of excluding workhouses. Their opinion is that anybody who spent time in a workhouse during the relevant time period, irrespective of their gender, age, disability, and pregnancy status, should also be included in the standardised payment, as the same mistreatment, discrimination, and conditions existed there. In their client's view, it's extremely harmful to exclude certain victims and survivors from this part of the redress process. So again, the committee may wish to ask further about the TEO's decision not to include workhouses. The bill also does not include victims and survivors in terms of redress for those who spent time in private homes, and Clause 31(2)(b) specifically excludes those who were in a listed institution but who were paying for private medical care there. 70% of those who responded to the public consultation disagreed with that exclusion. The independent panel, for example, in their response, their view was that women and girls who were separated from their child in circumstances, and those children, now adults, again, should be eligible, as did the Women's Policy Group. And the point was often made that those they may have been paid for by themselves or their family, but there were other reasons why that might have happened. For example, to cover up sexual abuse or incest within the family. So there's and the stigma and shame of being in those institutions existed regardless. Is the point that's often made in a lot of those responses. Clause 31(4) provides for children, now adults, who were born while their mother was under the care of a relevant institution to be eligible, or whose mothers were under the care of a relevant institution until immediately before the birth to be eligible. Posthumous claims, which I know is an area the committee has a particular interest in. Firstly, in terms of posthumous claims, Schedule 3 of the bill clarifies eligible relatives in relation to posthumous claims. As introduced, the bill would allow claims to be made by a person who's either the partner or the child of the deceased. The public consultation suggested a posthumous date for the redress scheme of the 15th of November 2021. The consultation report notes that 60% of respondents disagreed with that, and most felt there should either be no date at all or it should be 1922, in line with the period to be investigated by the inquiry. The bill itself didn't go with that date, and as you'll be aware, Clause 31(5)(b) proposes a posthumous date of the 29th of September 2011. This date was chosen as it's the date that the HIA inquiry was announced. A number of the organisations who responded to the consultation from TEO suggest no cut-off date at all. The independent panel notes that the HIA redress scheme was amended, that date was amended to 1953, due to that was the date of an official inspection report into one of the institutions. They note there's evidence of the state's knowledge of what was happening in mother and baby, Magdalene laundry and workhouses institutions going back decades, and on that basis they suggest there should be no cut-off date in the bill. That is a similar response from the Women's Policy Group as well. And as you'll be aware, I'm sure, that campaigners, including victims and survivors, also find that that cut-off date unacceptable, or some of them find that unacceptable. The payment amount, Clause 31(9) provides for this. £10,000 for anyone admitted to a listed institution or who was born in a listed institution. An eligible family member of someone who's now deceased will be entitled to £2,000. Under 31.8, a victim and survivor who is admitted to multiple institutions listed is only entitled to one payment. However, a victim survivor may be entitled to both £10,000 and £2,000 if they meet the relevant eligibility criteria for both of those. As you'll be aware again, the amount is a concern for a number of people and to the organisational responses. So the majority of respondents to the consultation, about 54%, had a concern that was too low, or that was the main concern that they raised. Organisations, some of whom did not suggest a specific amount, but suggested it be increased. But Women's Policy Group, the Independent Panel and WAVE were three of those, and the Independent Panel suggested 15,000 should be the payment rather than 10. So the committee may wish to ask TEO again what considerations they've given to different amounts and what impact those changes would have on the affordability of the scheme as a whole, as well as the individually assessed payment. One comment I'll just make on the last bit on the eligibility section is around the convention rights under the ECHR. So under TEO's Human Rights Impact Assessment, it highlights a number of the eligibility provisions within the bill as introduced would engage Protocol 1 of Article 1 of ECHR, which is the right to property, and could engage Article 14, which is prohibition of discrimination. I'm not a legal expert, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but they have suggested that some of the rights could be interfered with in relation to some of the eligibility requirements. So specifically in respect of the exclusion of private patients, victims and survivors who were admitted to institutions other than those listed in Schedule 2, and families of those people who died before the posthumous date as well. The impact assessment provides TEO's explanations as to why they believe potential interference in those rights is proportionate, and those convention rights can be interfered with, providing they're proportionate. The committee may want to consider the proportionality that TEO have explained in the impact assessment, and of course be satisfied that those provisions, as well as others in the bill, are compliant with the convention. Briefly, clause 32, the length of time of the redress service. So that it's provided for that it will be 3 years with a possible 2-year extension. The regulations to extend the redress service are by negative resolution. So again, the committee may wish to consider whether that's appropriate, in particular, as Karen will come on to, the financial implications of extending the scheme, amongst other things. And then finally, I'll just mention how the membership of the scheme and how applications are assessed under the bill. So clause 33 is relevant here, as well as paragraphs 3 and 5 of Schedule 1. Clause 33 sets out that applications must be considered by a judicial member of the service or by a panel of members, one of whom must be a judicial member. The service as a whole must have at least two judicial members, one of whom is the president of the service, and at least one non-judicial member. And it would be for the Lady Chief Justice to appoint the president of the service and the other judicial members of the service. So, from the consultation report, most respondents agreed that this should be an independent body headed by a judge. However, there were some concerns expressed around it causing redress to become too court-like and too quasi-judicial and adversarial. And a lot of respondents recommended the inclusion of victims and survivors in that part. For comparison, although to note, redress in different places is always very different, so it's not always easy to compare. But for comparison, the chair of Redress Scotland at present has a professional background as a chartered psychologist and systemic psychotherapist. And the panels that Redress Scotland use have a wide range of people who are members of them, and they don't require judicial members of those panels. So judicial members aren't required to make the decisions on redress under the Scottish legislation. So in that respect, the committee may wish to examine what the rationale is for having judicial members as a requirement on those panels to make the decisions, and whether having a broader multidisciplinary panel composition similar to Redress Scotland could provide a less adversarial process. You may also consider it helpful to understand from TEO what experience it considers desirable for the non-judicial members of the service, and how it intends to appoint those members in a timely manner. And finally, you might also wish to ask TEO how many members of the service they consider might be necessary, which will also play into the financial side of it. So with that, I'll pass to Karen and to discuss the financial implications of the bill.
Hi everyone. As Thomas said, I will go through the projected costs of the bill, and that's the inquiry and the redress scheme. As you'll be very glad to hear, I also will not go through a clause by clause financial analysis. We've all had a long day. I think it might be useful, before I go on and talk about the specific costs of this bill, to take you through some recent research that was completed by the National Audit Office, the House of Lords and Institute of Government, who have all done reviews of public inquiries across the UK. And there's just some of the themes that they found that I thought might be useful background when considering this bill. First of all, the most significant cost driver for most of the inquiries looked at was legal staff, and that averaged around 36% of all inquiry costs. Then also, secondly, the cost of establishing and maintaining the inquiry venue, including setting up and maintaining the IT, such as the video conferencing that Michael's already mentioned, and other general running costs usually account for around 30% of inquiries. In addition to the inquiry chair and legal advisors, most inquiries usually have a team of a secretariat staff, and they would be policy specialists, technicians, administrative staff, who are all there to support the inquiry process. And typically the costs for non-legal staff in inquiry account for around 18% of inquiry costs. The length of time that an inquiry runs for is also a major driver for inquiry costs, and this includes from the very start. So the length of time that it takes to agree the terms of reference, the length of time that it takes to establish the venue and getting the secretariat in place. There are other minor costs that have been identified, such as witness expenses and communication and consultancy fees. So, as you know, the TEO have estimated that this inquiry will cost in the region of 14 million, and this is based on a number of assumptions: that the inquiry lasts for no more than 3 years, that there's a chair and 2 panel members. There will also be an 8-person advisory panel, and that would be made up of people with direct experience. And there will be in around 320 witnesses or core participants, and expenses for witnesses and panel members would be based on the Crown Prosecution Service daily rates. So whilst they have these assumptions, I suppose it's important to highlight that there's a number of aspects to the inquiry that can't really be fully tied down at this point. For example, the terms of reference will dictate the scope and therefore the length of the inquiry. And although the terms of reference will be drafted by the TEO, this should be done in consultation with the inquiry chair, and this is important for the independence of the inquiry. But obviously then the terms of reference cannot be finalised until the chair is appointed, because they have to be consulted with. Obviously then the terms of reference will also influence the scope of the inquiry, such as the number of institutions that will be considered, the number of witnesses that could be called, and therefore expenses and length of time of the inquiry will all be influenced by the terms of reference. So
although the TEO has allowed for 11 prescribed institutions, as Thomas mentioned, and this is based on the UU and QUB research in 2021, although as set out in Clause 3, TEO can change this if required, but only once draft regulations have been laid before and approved by the Assembly. So that's just another scrutiny point really that you should be aware of. The size of the inquiry panel is also an important factor that will influence costs, and the panel has to be established in consultation with the chair. So of course then we'll have to wait until the chair is appointed until the panel is formalised. The TO have also allowed for an advisory panel of up to 8 people, and they will be paid an honorarium and daily costs, and they have estimated that there would be 8 people would be required for around 42 days over the 3 years of the inquiry. Again, the size of the panel, the number of days they'll be required for, and the overall length of the inquiry itself will influence those costs. The expenses costs that TEO have allowed for, as I said, they've allowed for around 320 witnesses. If the scope of the inquiry changes, those costs could also change. Sort of by way of context, I suppose, to give you an idea of how close this is to other inquiries. The historical abuse inquiry lasted for 223 days and cost just over 13 million. Its EFM estimated that costs would be around 15 million. So really, as you can see in your paper, we had quite a few scrutiny points relating to the inquiry, and just to highlight a few of them, you might want to consider what financial contingencies TEO has in place should the inquiry take longer than 3 years, and how did they account for any potential future changes to the number of institutions to be investigated under Clause 3, or the definition of relevant persons under Clause 4 when compiling the projected costs. And also, do TEO plan to regularly and routinely collect financial information regarding the inquiry costs? If we then think about the costs associated with the redress scheme, as you know, the bill, as introduced, proposes a statutory financial redress scheme to acknowledge past wrongs and not a form of compensation. This is a one-off standardised payment based on admittance to one of the prescribed institutions. Under the EFM, the bill allows for 58.2 million of financial redress. As the TEO itself pointed out, the proposed redress scheme will in fact be demand-led, which makes it very difficult to estimate the actual amount that will be required, because we don't know the number of people that will be coming forward. TEO have very usefully provided Ray's with some background information regarding their underlying assumptions behind these costs. And they've estimated that there would be around 4,500 victims and survivors who would come forward for the £10,000 redress payment, and around 6,600 for the £2,000 posthumous payment. And as Thomas mentioned, in some cases, under some circumstances, some people would be eligible for both. But I think it's important to highlight how the demand could significantly impact on the cost of this redress. For example, if we even had a 10% more than anticipated demand, your costs for the redress scheme alone would be up to 64 million. So very quickly you could rank up big costs. In addition to the redress payments themselves, it's also important to consider the costs associated with the administration of the scheme. TEO estimated that the cost would be in the region of 2.6 million over 3 years. So that would be a total of 7.8 million. As Thomas also mentioned, in Clause 32, TEO have the right by negative resolution to increase the administration of the scheme by a further 2 years. That would bring the total admin costs for the scheme up to 13 million. Given the financial implications of the regulations that could be laid under these clauses if the bill is enacted as introduced, the TEO, the committee, may want to keep a watching brief on this. As you can see from your paper, there was quite a few scrutiny points, and really just to highlight a few. How confident is the TEO that they have identified all the relevant institutions for the purposes of the redress scheme? And how did TEO account for any future potential amendments to the number of proposed institutions and the definition of relevant persons? And I really suppose just to explain that, although Clause 3 and 4 relate directly to the inquiry itself, there may be future implications then going forward for the redress scheme. Just a few final thoughts. The total cost of the bill as introduced would be, to the public purse, would be around 80 million. This bill and the associated costings do not include any potential individually assessed harm-based compensation scheme. Such a scheme would follow in separate legislation after the conclusion of the inquiry. And as you know, it's noted in the EFM, TEO have highlighted that they will be seeking financial contributions from responsible organisations where failings have been identified, and you may wish to be updated as how they propose in doing this and what processes they'll use. TEO have also highlighted that they have been engaging with the Northern Ireland Office and Treasury regarding a contribution from Westminster for periods when Northern Ireland was under direct rule, and again you may want to be kept updated as to the progress of those negotiations.
Great, so I think that's all we're going to say on this at the moment. As I said at the start, just to make the point that this isn't covering every clause, and anything that we've missed out we don't think is unimportant or anything like that. It's just that we wanted to kind of highlight some of the ones where perhaps the consultation responses or other bits and pieces had sort of raised them to us that we thought was important to mention. But happy to take questions on those or anything else that's in the bill.
Thank you all. That was really good, and the papers are really, really thorough. You have obviously all done a lot of work on this, so I really appreciate that. It's going to help us in this process. I suppose there's a couple of things that jump out at me. First of all is the assumptions that they make, the Executive Office, in terms of 4,500 redress claimants, 6,600 posthumous claimants. Whenever we consider how the efforts that have, I'm more speaking to the air here probably, the efforts that have been made to get people to come forward and give witness statements or make testimonies, we're in the three figures, we're not in low three figures, and I think that the assumptions are way off. So I suppose in some ways we should be asking where they got those from. I know they said that there were up to 10,000 passed through the Mother Baby Homes plus their children, but I just think that in terms of the evidence, in terms of who's engaged with the truth recovery process to date, and now I think that
I totally take your point, Chair. And as you said, they're based on the populations that were estimated from the 2021 report. They also have looked at the number of people who came forward for redress payment in the scheme in the Republic of Ireland, and as you say, that was a lot lower than anticipated. I think maybe that's a point to raise with the officials themselves. Perhaps they're being conservative.
Okay. No, I agree.
Risk adverse.
Yeah, probably. I suppose the other aspect that jumps out, especially in terms of your part there, Karen, was in relation to the 320 witnesses, I suppose. Again, because there's been a lot of effort gone in so far through the Truth Recovery Independent Panel to take those witness statements, to what degree are they going to be taken, or will there be a duplication of effort when the inquiry comes? So that's something for us. And then I suppose the other aspect is in relation to this. I'm not sure that the bill is clear enough around the links between the scope of this bill and people entering workhouses. And I think, Thomas, you touched upon that in terms of the harsh treatment and, you know, it's only just women and it's only just women who've had children, etc. So I suppose that's something we need to tease out, whether we want to expand the bill or whether we think that the language isn't, well, the bill needs tidied up a bit. So do you want to speak to the workhouses sort of?
I think just the, you know, I think that was certainly something that came through in the organisational responses to the consultation, which I spoke about a lot because those are the ones that we were, you know, able to actually see. So, but the ones who did mention it in terms of the scope were quite clear that, you know, conditions in the workhouses were you know, were also bad and difficult, and people, you know, there was a stigma in that as well. So there was a difference where some suggested that it was women and girls who were admitted there and their children who, as with the other institutions, should be eligible, whereas some suggested anybody who was in a workhouse, no matter their gender or whether they were why they were there and whether they were having a baby, should be included. So from the consultation document that TU put out, my understanding, and I think it's in the paper a bit more, is that there's difficulties if they were to open up the redress scheme to workhouses, bearing in mind the idea of the whole scheme is to, because of the gendered nature of the system, and the kind of misogyny around that to open up workhouses where they know people of all, you know, men and women were there, that then to narrow that down to women opens up a lot of difficult legal questions around whether that's possible and the kind of potential discrimination around that. So I think it's from their reading of it, it's not as straightforward, but it's something that's definitely worth, I think, asking about.
I know from some of the, I think it's in the QUB and UU research paper, they mentioned that the record keeping in the workhouses was very sporadic, and it might be much more difficult to include them in any inquiry or redress service.
Mm-hmm. I know, I appreciate it. I think it's just in terms of the bill being very crystal clear on this. But thank you, Deputy Chair. I'm conscious of time. Deputy Chair, and then
I'm very
Carol.
much pressed for time. I have a school prize giving to go to very soon. Yeah, and I think the other area, I take the point you've made about workhouses, but another area that's been raised as well with us is what happened to children that were moved into foster care, and that's another aspect that's not directly dealt with in legislation. But there were institutions moved children into foster care, so they had a duty of care to the child with the foster parents, and there's substantial evidence of abuse by foster parents, and therefore by extension the organisation that placed them there.
I think as well, it's just probably worth pointing out again, which I know you're aware of, that the payment, the standardised payment that's legislated for in this bill is that it's supposed to be, the TO have said, an acknowledgement payment for those specific institutions, whereas the kind of harm that was caused and maybe more complex will be in the IP, but that won't come until after the inquiry, and as we know, there's nothing to say how long that might be, so it could be quite far down the line. And we don't know.
And if this piece of legislation doesn't alert you to the fact that these other things were possible, then...
Yeah, I think as well that'll, I mean, Michael might be able to speak to it, but the scope of the inquiry would also, you know, see whether it covers that and how the terms of reference are framed.
And very quickly, just with regards to the panel,
Oh yes, the advisory panel.
of people that the chair can appoint, is that up to a maximum number as stated in the legislation? I think it says 8, isn't that right?
Oh, the advisory panel?
Yes, the advisory panel.
Yes.
So it's a maximum
Up to
of 8?
it, yeah.
Up to 8, yeah.
But in theory, the chair might only appoint one person or none. They could decide they could do it without it, as it currently stands.
I think the advisory panel is up to the discretion of the chair how many
in which
individuals.
case...
He's making. That's the point you're making.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they could go without. And equally well, I think the other area is there's no definition of what the work of the advisory panel actually is.
Yeah. I think that's something we need to tease out the terms of reference.
Sorry.
Carol, please.
So I was contacted by a survivor, and they asked, maybe others on the committee as well about St Joseph's Home on Yormer Road. And others have came forward around the private hospitals. One girl I met just as recess the following week, she basically said that her mother talked about being coerced by her parents. So there's a lot of coercion and control. And then the other aspect I'm worried about is the workhouses, because if we are looking at the lens of patriarchy and misogyny and all that, but you know, where and how is that defined? Stuart's issued or covered the issue around the panel. I think like we have a bit of tidying up to do, because up to 8 could mean nothing, and it could be at least 8 with the discretion of whatever. But I also looked at the ECHR, so Article 13 is a right and effective remedy, and then Article 14, as you've mentioned, is the prohibition of discrimination. So the effective remedy may come in for men, boys who were in workhouses, and that's a big challenge in terms of finances. But I mean, the 2 papers were brilliant, so thank you. They're going to be of great help.
Definitely.
Going through the passage of this legislation, so thanks.
Thank you. Okay, I'm wondering, I know they're in the pack, but I wonder, can we get them just sent out as PDFs, as emails? I always find them easier just to...
If we could, yeah.
Go ahead, please, Timothy.
I don't want to delay, we've talked about this at length, but my concern is contributions. And it's been shared with me that we will be in a competition almost with the South to get money out of the institutions, those that have operated on an all-Ireland basis. And I do believe that this committee, and I think there's unanimous support, that we need to ensure that we have something built into this bill, that it isn't just the state that is left to pick up the entirety of the cost. There needs to be a fair contribution from those that carried out the harms that have taken place. And as well as that, when we're running through with, it's one thing getting the payment, but we need to ensure that we have the services to go with it. And it's not something of 3 years, 5 years. It needs to be, people need access to services for the entirety of the time they require them. It's not really anything, it's just a comment that I will keep making as we go along regarding contribution and services. Are very, very important at this committee when we're putting the legislation through, that the protections are built in to ensure that we're able to get out of this, and people are able to get out of this what they require and the support that they require. This will cause a lot of trauma for people, and we need to ensure that this process and the process, the legislation, doesn't make that any worse, and that we have the help and support for people to navigate them through it.
Great.
Yeah, I think just on your point, Timothy, about the contributions, as Karen mentioned as well, so there's nothing in the bill about there being a legal requirement for financial contributions. And not to speak for TEO, but I know they have spoken about that because of the type of scheme this is, an admission-based scheme, it's perhaps more difficult to do that. Whereas the later scheme, the harm-based scheme, that's different because you're looking at the harm cause rather than just being an institution, and I don't mean just in a blasé way. It's also worth noting that TEO, as well as ourselves, we haven't found anywhere where someone's successfully been able to legislate to force those payments, and
even if you don't find, that doesn't say that we shouldn't push them doors.
No, it's not to say it's not possible, but just to when we discussed previously about the Scottish scheme, for example, that's a voluntary scheme on the basis of a waiver being put in place that someone who accepts the payment cannot take a claim against that institution. So there's kind of an agreement around that, but again, it's a voluntary scheme, and institutions do not have to sign up to it if they don't want to. So yes, just I think to make the point of the difference between the types of payment as well, and how that plays into the funding of it, and how that might work.
You think then for phase 2, there's a better opportunity available to get contributions from institutions, because that's somebody identifying a harm that has been caused, and not to quantify a harm, but it's almost labelling that to an institution. This happened.
I mean,
And
And
worked
their
to some
premises
extent with
under
the
their care.
HIA inquiry. You know, following the HIA inquiry, they were able to identify where there was failings within the institutions, and then that worked to some extent. There was did they call him a negotiator? Was that what they called him in the
although,
south?
there obviously hasn't been the actual contributions. I mean, I wouldn't like to say necessarily what might not work, but I think because you have an admittance scheme at this point, an institution may say, well, we're not contributing because somebody was there, whereas it's maybe more difficult to push against that when the inquiry has maybe identified these are the experiences. We can kind of set out exactly what happened in this institution, for example. So I think there might be, it might be, I wouldn't say an easier avenue. I don't think it's easier, but I think after the inquiry for that second assess payment, maybe that's where. And you look at, for example, in Scotland, where they have received some voluntary contributions from institutions, that redress scheme is a harm-based scheme, so it's more akin to that. The IEP scheme that will come following the inquiry. Yeah.
I think that's a really important point. I think we're all keen to see contributions, but I think that it might be easier to demonstrate once the inquiry's concluded its work. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Chair, just to say that the committee are due to receive legal briefing. We did request legal advice on that very subject as to how easy it would be to try and compel organisations, and that will be coming to us in the next couple of weeks. So just to remind you of that.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sure you'll be back before us through the course of this, but for now, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Members,
Thank you.
I'm really conscious that we're...
I'm getting left here in
I
10
know.
minutes.
Okay. No, what I've spoke to what I have agreed with the Clarke here is that we'll drop the next session, if that's okay. Actually, Nick was going to lead on it. We will take the correspondence and add it to next week's pack, so we'll have to, it'll be even longer. But I think the only other thing that we have to do is ask any other business.
Go ahead.
No, you're okay. So we were going to raise, did we cover all the matters arising?
The main matters arising was the letter from the Equality Commission.
Yes.
So that was the only bit, wasn't it?
Anything else?
Chair, that's right. The rest of it sits under correspondence.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fine.
The one thing I want to say was Oxdo, the programme that I look at the committee papers under, wouldn't open this week
Mine's
because
either.
they're so big.
Yeah.
So if you're going to bring the correspondence from this week and put it into next week's, I'll probably have the same problem.
Is that why mine kept crashing? That's
I presume so, because it's so big.
Mine's wouldn't open either.
I think, Chair, there was an issue with the ECP.
You used sent an email, didn't you?
Yeah, which meant that things
pack
didn't
was
work.
delivered
this week.
manually
We'll-
yesterday.
Can I
okay.
just...
Okay, sorry. Just excuse me, please, Deputy Chair. Go ahead.
Sorry, can I just read into the record our actions from our earlier following FM and DFM, just so whether we have those, I've got them all written down, then they're in, and then we can go. So just to recap, we were looking for an update on CRC and T-Book and everything surrounding that. Committee were looking for an update on the work of the AI and Digital Office and more detail on that area. Committee were looking for an update on the Local Change Fund, specifically around the timescales on funding, the projects and the programmes and the delivery from the start to the finish on that. And I know that Timothy had asked specifically about Mid and East Antrim, but I will include all of them in that one. Committee were looking for an update on the investment strategy and where we were with that. Committee were also wanting to get more detail on this £20 million allocation for Lough and what that actually breaks down into and the delivery of that. And then the final one I have is just inquiring with the department about an additional session for junior ministers to come to committee.
On the mother and baby.
Yes, that's right. Is that? I
Okay.
think that's everything.
Is that everything?
That's
Thank
great.
you, everybody. See you next week.
If you could adjourn the meeting, that would be great.
Okay.
If you could just adjourn the meeting.
Well, the meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you.